Hi Divya, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. Thank you. I'll just quickly test first.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 2022 UNESCO-KEDI Asia Pacific Regional Policy Seminar. I am Hyowon Park, Associate Research Fellow at KEDI, Korean Educational Development Institute. Let me first of all thank all of you for joining us from across different time zones. As its title is self-explanatory, this seminar is an annual event co-organized by UNESCO and KEDI, whose history dates as far back as 2001. Over the past 2 decades, we have dealt with a multiplicity of educational issues and concerns that our region faced. This year, our attention turns to learning recovery with the subtitle of Saving a Generation of Learners, which is more important than ever before. Due to the COVID-19 crisis. Before we jump into more details, please allow me to give you a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded. Questions are welcome throughout this webinar via the Zoom Q&A box. If applicable, please direct your question to a speaker and be clear and concise. Please use the chat box for general comments. Simultaneous interpretation services are provided in Thai and Russian throughout the webinar, and in Korean to English for sessions 1 and 2. And finally, webinar resources will be continuously made available on the event webpage. Now it's time to hear from the representatives of the organizers. Let me first of all invite Mr. Shigeru Aoyagi, Director of UNESCO Bangkok, to make some welcome remarks. He could not join us today in person, so we will play his pre-recorded video instead.
Dr. Liu, President, Korean Educational Development Institute, or KEDI. Dr. Kim, Director, Office of International Cooperation, KEDI. Distinguished panelists and presenters, distinguished policymakers, educators, researchers, practitioners, teachers, and students. On behalf of UNESCO Asia Pacific Regional Bureau for Education in Bangkok, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this year's UNESCO-KEDI Asia Pacific Regional Policy Seminar. Over 2 decades, UNESCO and KEDI have enjoyed partnering in projects and practices that contribute to educational development and cooperation in Asia and the Pacific, and towards the advancement of the Global Education 2030 Agenda. UNESCO is pleased to be a long-standing partner with KEDI in this endeavor, which has yielded positive and notable changes in education development and transformation in the region. In this spirit of friendship and productive partnership, I'd like to take this opportunity to warmly congratulate KEDI on its 50th anniversary this year. This half-century milestone is testimony to how KEDI continues to distinguish itself as one of the most renowned research institutes worldwide. Each year, the UNESCO-KEDI seminar brings together policymakers from Ministry of Education, educators, and related practitioners, stakeholders, and researchers from the Asia-Pacific region. The seminar thus provides an annual regional platform for the exchange of practical knowledge and promising practices in education policy and program implementation, all responding in a timely manner to emerging needs and issues. We are indeed excited to have everyone together today for this year's seminar with the theme, Learning Recovery, Saving a Generation of Learners. This year's seminar focuses on the learning recovery efforts throughout the region in the post-COVID-19 era. And participants will be closely looking at the diverse contexts and challenges that countries in the region are facing as they aim to re-engage learners and mitigate numerous learning losses and gaps that have emerged over the last several years. Just months ago, in early June, UNESCO and the UNICEF regional offices jointly organized the second Asia-Pacific Regional Education Ministers Conference, or APREMC 2, which was co-hosted by the Thai Ministry of Education with general support of Japan's Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science and Technology, or MEXT. At this important conference, the Bangkok Statement 2022 was collectively endorsed by over 40 education ministers and other stakeholders from across the region. Today's seminar builds upon the recent commitments from countries in Asia and the Pacific to urgently take individual and collective action, namely to reopen schools and set up effective learning recovery strategies with particular emphasis on the most vulnerable to ensure that all learners catch up on lost learning. At its peak, the COVID-19 pandemic forced schools to close fully or partially in 93% of countries worldwide and 90% of countries in the region. Within our vast region, full school closures have lasted for considerably different durations across countries, ranging from as little as a few weeks in some countries to over a year in others. Prolonged school closures have inevitably led to unprecedented disruptions of learning, resulting in an estimated loss of 1.1 trillion hours of in-person learning across the region. The longer the schools remain closed, the greater the learning losses. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the most consequential effects of such learning loss has been to considerably increase long-standing inequalities in education. As to be expected, learners from low-income families and other vulnerable groups were the most affected by learning loss due to school closures. Learners with disabilities and girls also faced compounding barriers to learning during school closures. While remote or online learning quickly became a primary means for ensuring that learning continues safely outside the typical classroom context, the underprivileged struggled due to a lack of internet connectivity, insufficient electricity, lack of electric devices, and insufficient caregiver support compared to their better funded peers. At this date, as many as 10.7 million learners in Asia and the Pacific are estimated to be at risk of not returning to schools and other educational institutions in the post-pandemic recovery period, now in progress. It is thus urgent for us to immediately take action to ensure that a generation of learners is not lost to the pandemic and that all learners are provided the opportunity to pursue quality education. This is the commitment expressed by the Asia-Pacific UNESCO member states in the Bangkok Statement 2022. UNESCO's Asia-Pacific Regional Bureau for Education is fully committed to working with countries in the region to ensure effective learning and mitigation of learning losses and school dropouts. Ultimately, we need to put together our individual efforts to ensure that we do not lose a generation of learners in the pandemic's aftermath. Over the 3 sessions of today's timely seminar, we look forward to fruitful discussions, exchanging ideas, and sharing perspectives and approaches. I would like to thank all our colleagues, and particularly those from the Office of International Cooperation, KEDI, for their strong collaboration and support in preparing for this year's seminar. Not least of all, I thank everyone here today for joining us, and I wish everyone a successful and productive seminar. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aoyagi. Now let's move on to Dr. Bang Liu, President of KEDI. Dr. Liu could also not make it today due to a prior commitment. Please note that we will play her pre-recorded video message instead.
Good afternoon. On behalf of Korean Educational Development Institute, I welcome all of you to this year's seminar. I am deeply grateful to our long-standing partner, UNESCO Bangkok, for co-hosting this meaningful event. Special thanks to the director, Mr. Shigeru Aoyagi, and all the colleagues from UNESCO Bangkok. I would also like to extend my warm welcome and appreciation to our distinguished guests and speakers who will share their rich experiences and expertise. Last year, the seminar shed light on the difficulties faced by teachers during the pandemic. The seminar gave us a valuable opportunity to discuss different ways to strengthen teachers' pedagogical and digital skills. We reaffirmed that teachers, as agents of change and facilitators, play a critical role regardless of learning modality and available technology. However, we have a long way to go, as the education sector is still facing a number of challenges. The prolonged COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted learning opportunity for millions of children. It also incurred substantial global learning losses. We know that even before the pandemic, 57% of 10-year-olds in low and middle-income countries were unable to read or comprehend a simple story. Now, the figure is estimated to be as high as 70% with the increased learning poverty. It is worrying that the future of today's children and the economic prospects of their countries are at stake. Despite many countries' effort to reach students with some type of remote learning, the vast majority have seen their learning process seriously impacted. Evidence is mounting that children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and other disadvantaged groups suffer large learning losses. Without strong foundational skills, children are unlikely to thrive in increasingly demanding labor markets. Therefore, investing in their education is critical for building fairer societies and ensuring equal opportunities. We must provide a sharp learning acceleration with a robust recovery from the COVID shock. If the pandemic taught us anything, there is nothing more important than supporting teachers and students. We also recognize the need to accelerate education recovery before it's too late. In the same vein, the global priority remains to ensure all learners, particularly the most vulnerable children, are supported to return to school and receive an equal chance to learn. As we safely reopen schools and reimagine the future of education, Asia-Pacific countries have also been committed to developing and implementing learning recovery strategies. The Korean government has also strived to establish more equitable, accountable, and resilient education systems. These are expected to tackle learning losses and ensure teachers and students' health and psychosocial well-being in and out of schools. Now it's time to learn from the past while looking to the future to provide equity for everyone. I believe we will find new ideas, fresh energy, and innovative partnership through our seminar. Moreover, the seminar's outcome will help continue to efforts in the sustainable long-term support for education recovery. It is also spur countries into accelerating further action for a vigorous learning recovery. Finally, I wish to extend a profound acknowledgement to all participants for their time and contributions. I also thank all my colleagues who have supported this seminar. Wish you all have a meaningful discussion and a successful seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. Okay, now please allow me to briefly introduce the agenda for today. Today, we will begin the seminar by setting the scene with the title, Overview of Learning Recovery Post-COVID-19, Regional and International Roadmaps for the Learning Recovery. After that, there will be 3 sessions. The first session is a panel discussion on policy responses for learning recovery in 3 countries. The second session is to focus on exemplar approaches to a safe return to schools for all learners by 3 speakers. And the third session is to cover effective examples of learning recovery approaches and strategies with 4 presenters. All right, before we get down to business, shall we take a group photo to commemorate this day? Please, all the speakers and moderators, turn on your camera so that the meeting host can spotlight you. Once again, all the speakers and moderators, please turn on your camera. Mr. Kang, over to you.
Okay, everyone, one more. Turn on your camera. Smile, 1, 2, 3. Okay, finish. Thank you.
Okay then. Thank you, everyone. Please turn off your camera until your session. Okay then, before we get down to the main sessions, let me call on Ms. Margaret Sachs-Israel, Chief of the Section for Inclusive Quality Education, UNESCO Bangkok, to set the scene for us. Ms. Margaret, please.
Good afternoon to everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome everyone and to be here at this very important seminar, which is about a topic that concerns us all. So as the title of the presentation already says, I will be providing with a more detailed overview of learning recovery and the context COVID-19, looking at what has happened at national, regional, and global level in order to put in motion a learning recovery roadmap. So let me start by reminding ourselves of the regional education context post-COVID-19 and the impact that COVID-19 actually made on education and learning, including the pre-existing learning crises. So we know, and it has been mentioned already in the opening remarks, that the COVID-19 crisis and the ensuing school closures in Asia Pacific severely impacted, on the one hand, equitable quality education delivery, learning outcomes, and students' engagement with their education, as well as their health and well-being. So altogether, more than 800 million learners were affected in the region, with vulnerable children being affected the most. We also know that the crisis had what we call a gendered impact, because boys typically received more support with schoolwork than girls on the one hand, but also we know that there has been an increased incidence of child marriage, of gender-based violence, early pregnancy, and other things that actually led to girls dropping out of school. Importantly, we know that, that despite all the efforts that countries made to provide continued education throughout the crises, millions were at risk of dropping out and not returning to school once schools and other learning institutions reopened. So, and I think what is really important to also not forget is that COVID-19 further exacerbated a pre-existing learning crisis. So how bad was this crisis? We know, for example, from a UNESCO report that in 2019, in half of the region's countries, 50% of children were unable to read and understand a simple sentence by age 10, despite having completed early grades. Now, this being said, of course, we know that learning achievements vary very much across the region. So, for example, in some countries, 9 in 10 students do reach adequate proficiency levels in the learning, while in others, it is as low as 1.7 in 10 students. So the situation has not been the same across the region, but still there is a very worrying tendency and a big learning crisis that has been already referred to in the beginning. Next slide, please. So here, with this slide, we wanted to show you once again the different lengths of school closures across the region, which obviously varied a lot. And therefore also the impact of COVID did vary a lot. Here you can see that in some countries, a school closure was as short as 1 month and went all the way up to 18 months or even 2 years in some countries. Now, despite this variation, I think what is most important to note is that overall in the region, 1.1 trillion in-person learning hours were lost in Asia and Pacific. So next, so what is most important to note is then that there obviously was a very important learning loss as a result of these school closures due to a variety of factors, including the capacity of countries to reach all learners with a quality distance education program, the ability of teachers to teach online, and connectivity issues, etc. But basically what we want to really highlight here is the figure that as a result of school closures, students in developing Asian countries may have lost almost 30% of learning adjusted years, according to early estimates of the ADB. So that also means that, I mean, here you can see in the chart that the impact was different in terms of learning loss. So in the Asian Pacific region, the majority of countries showed between a mild and a severe learning loss due to COVID-19. So, for example, in Southeast Asia, Thailand and the Philippines both reported mild to moderate learning losses, while Malaysia and Myanmar show severe learning losses. So you can see, again, the situation is not the same according to the country. That means also measures to be taken for learning recovery have to be different according to the country situation. Beyond academic, let's call it academic learning loss, I think we should really very much also insist and highlight the loss of well-being and deep problems in terms of psychosocial well-being of students and also of teachers. We still don't know really what the final effect of COVID-19 will be, and it will actually take years to really better understand the full impact, but we have to act now to ensure that there will not be a lost generation of learners, as is titled in this very conference. Next one. So now let's look at what actions and commitments were taken at the regional and national, but also at the global level to ensure effective learning recovery and to actually take that kind of action that is required to ensure that we do not have a lost generation of learners. So let me start by giving you a quick overview of the rapid learning recovery framework, which is a framework that was developed jointly by UNICEF, UNESCO, and the World Bank. And it provides guidelines for countries that they can adapt and contextualize depending on their needs to then develop learning recovery strategies. So as you can see in the 5 different sort of areas that are recommended to undertake action, let me start with the first one about reaching every child and keep them on track. So that obviously refers to ensuring that every single child and every single learner returns to his or her school or other learning institution and then stays in school. This is, of course, focusing in particular at vulnerable groups that are at risk of dropping out. The second action to be taken is to assess where they are in their learning, meaning to evaluate the learning levels and identify learning gaps, to then move and to be able to propose mitigating measures and catch-up courses. It is also recommended to start by prioritizing teaching the fundamentals, meaning having a prioritized curriculum, firstly looking at literacy and numeracy, but also looking at other sort of key competencies at the different levels of where the learners are. So the first one is increase the then catch-up learning efforts, which are already referred to. And finally, and importantly, to also develop initiatives to support learners to recuperate their psychosocial health and well-being. Next one, please. So now let's move to what happened at the regional level. Mr. Aoyagi, our director, already referred to this in his opening remarks. So at the regional level, UNESCO, together with its partners, organized the second Asia Pacific Regional Education Ministers Conference in June 2022 in Bangkok. So this conference was organized really at a very critical moment when countries started to reopen schools, or they were planning to do so. So they were all in a position or at a moment when they had to develop strategies to ensure that all learners would return to school and recover lost learning as an urgent and immediate action, while at the same time already initiating a rethinking of their education and their education systems. So the main outcome of this conference is what, as you can see here, what is called the Bangkok Statement 2022, which was signed by all the ministers present in the conference. We had almost 30 ministers and obviously the other educational stakeholders that participated from the region to take urgent action in 2 main areas. So the first one is to ensure a safe return to school and effective recovery of learning loss. And then secondly, to transform education and its systems to become more relevant, inclusive, and resilient. And then the statement does identify specific policy options for each of these 2 priority areas of actions. Now let's take a quick look at what the statement says in terms of the first priority. So here you have the first part of the first priority, which is on safe return to schools and creating enabling learning environments for all learners. So here we have 5 agreed policy options from the statements that says, the first one says, obviously when schools are reopened and other kinds of learning centers, it's very important that these learning spaces are safe and have adequate public health and social safety measures in place on the one hand, but that also these centers do have trained school personnel to actually implement them. This goes hand in hand with establishing an enabling learning environment so that school health and nutrition programs are there, but also social protection programs, and that what I mentioned before, the important psychosocial support can be provided. The next important action was to really look at how to ensure that everyone returns to school. So here, a policy option was to implement return to learning campaigns and putting in place targeted measures to really focus on vulnerable groups. That also goes hand in hand with the fourth action, which is strengthening flexible learning pathways, which aim at also recognizing non-formal education to reach every child and youth. And finally, it was also taken into consideration that in some countries, schools were still closed. So for those, it was important to ensure continuity of learning throughout with quality digital and other distance measures. Next one, please. So here we look at the second part of the first priority action, which is learning recovery strategy, which is really the focus of our seminar today. Here we can see that it reflects very much what we've seen already in the RAPID framework. So the first very important action is really to, for every country and every school and every teacher to understand where the student is when she comes back to school in terms of his or her learning level, and to identify the gaps in terms of both cognitive and social emotional learning. And then obviously to put in place mitigating measures. The second one is, again, you've heard about it in the RAPID framework, is to adapt the curriculum to prioritize foundational and core competencies. In order to do all of this, though, and this is very much highlighted in the statement throughout, is to really prepare and support teachers, but also non-formal educators to carry out these learning recovery strategies, but also starting by empowering them to understand where students are when they come back to school. And then supporting all of this through blended teaching and learning for all learners was also highlighted as another important policy option. Now, I mean, as you know, in preparation of the Transforming Education Summit, which was just held in New York, countries did undertake national consultations and came up with their national commitments in terms of transforming education in the future. So these national statements also have a section on learning recovery. And I think it's interesting to take a quick look at some extracts of what countries have said in the region in terms of how they want to not just undertake, but they really took a commitment on undertaking learning recovery. So again, referring to the first strategy, which is about the safe school reopening part and the well-being, we can see that countries did recognize the need that school reopening must be safe and ensure the retention of all learners. That was said by Cambodia. Lao PDR highlighted that it was important that to keep education institutions open, even in situations of emergencies, and support public health and social measures, as well as mental and psychosocial support for both learners and teachers. And in Sri Lanka, we looked again at the physical and mental well-being. Thailand, in terms of re-engaging learners, very much focused on the most vulnerable and ensuring that all learners return to school with a focus on out-of-school children and those at risk of not returning. By the way, this is something that really cuts across every country, meaning a lot of focus was put on equity and inclusion and really looking at meeting the needs of vulnerable groups. Learning recovery and strategies, here we found that many countries did also say that they wanted to start with prioritizing foundational literacy and numeracy skills, but also that it was necessary to, first of all, identify what were the knowledge gaps in order to design recovery programs. Finally, ICT and blended learning, of course, is a very important means to support learning recovery. But for that, in order to do that, increase and enhance ICT connectivity and facilities was important for many countries. And then also going forward to strengthen blended learning to ensure that every child and learner could be reached. Next. Okay, so finally, in order to conclude, I just wanted to leave you with a few sort of key messages out of all of these reflections. We really would like to underline once again the urgency to act, because the longer we wait, the longer we do not put in place learning recovery measures, and we do not ensure that every child and youth learns, the greater the risk there will be of dropout and generational catastrophe. So it is important to really act at the school level. Of course, we have to put in place policies and strategies and plans and very much funding to ensure that all of this happens, but we really have to intervene at the school level. So that means we have to support schools, teachers and learners, but also their parents, with very practical and very easy to use tools and targeted guidelines and training to be able to implement all the things that we were just talking about. Equity and inclusion needs to be put at the heart of the learning recovery, because we said many times that vulnerable groups were really not only hit the most, but they're most at risk of not returning. And then whatever we do, we have to keep in mind the broader issue of the learning crises, which pre-existed COVID-19, and we need to address this learning crisis at the systemic level, which also includes teacher training, very importantly. Because while digital transformation is of course key and needs to be strengthened, it is a means and a tool, and at the heart of education, the teacher will always remain. And I want to conclude by saying that obviously UNESCO stands ready to support countries in the Asia Pacific to design and set up effective learning recovery strategies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Margaret, for setting the scene for us for the seminar today. Now let's move to the session 1 panel discussion on policy responses for learning recovery, which will be led by Ms. Margaret Israel, once again, Chief of the Section for Inclusive Quality Education, UNESCO Bangkok. Please note that the simultaneous interpretation services are provided in Thai and Russian and in Korean in this session. Ms. Margaret, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much once again. So now let's move to the first session. So just very quickly what the session is about. So the objective of the session is to present and highlight the efforts made by governments and education authorities from different countries across the region to ensure a safe return to in-person learning for all learners and to mitigate the learning losses. So the panel discussion that will follow will highlight different challenges encountered, but also very importantly, we'll discuss what policies, what strategies, and what concrete practices were put in place to ensure learning recovery. So with that, please allow me to quickly introduce the three panelists and then pass the floor to them. So we have the great pleasure to have with us today Dr. Benjalug Namfa, who is a high-level advisor to the Office of the Basic Education Commission, short OBIC, of the Ministry of Education, Thailand, and has a very broad and profound experience in education policy and practice. She has served Thailand in various positions, both at the high-level policymaking and also at the implementation levels. Formerly, as Deputy General of OBIC, she employed her expertise in teacher development and learning processes. Currently, she is the manager of the Princess Mahachakri Award Foundation. Dr. Benjalug holds a doctorate degree in curriculum, teaching, and education policies, and a master's degree in elementary education from Michigan State University, USA. So that will be our first speaker. Then we have Dr. Hee-Jung Lee, who is a research fellow of the Office of School Education Research at the Korean Education Development Institute, KEDI, one of Korea's leading national think tanks established in 1972. Before that, Dr. Lee worked as a research fellow at the Office of Education Welfare Research at KEDI. Dr. Lee holds a PhD in education from Seokmuyong Women's University, Korea. Her main research interests include education, welfare, student well-being, after-school care, and educational psychology. And thirdly, we have Dr. Umarov Nulan Kovacevic. Dr. Kovacevic was the rector of the Kyrgyz German Institute of Applied Information before serving 3 years as a Deputy Minister of Education and Science at the Kyrgyz Republic. He serves in several boards of trustees and supervisory boards for universities and international development assistance projects. Now, just before we begin, I would like to ask the audience to put your questions to the panelists in the chat so we can answer them later. At the end of the session, we'll dedicate 5 minutes to address these. So now I would like to start with the first question to all 3 panelists. Now, could you describe very briefly the impact of COVID-19 and school closures on access to quality education and learning outcomes in your country? And as schools reopened, what were the main strategies and policies that were put in place to address these? Dr. Benjaluk, please.
Thank you very much. I will use my.
Cannot hear him.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Okay. So in response to the first question, I like to also use with my slide presentation. So can someone bring in the presentation, please? Okay. Actually, so it has been almost 2 years for us to face on the COVID-19 pandemic, and a lot of things has been done. And what I will share today is experience from OBEC, which is Basic Education Commission. So the impact on education, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, I would like to put in 5 categories that related to the learning loss. So the first one is learning time loss. So we all know that normally students have 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. For Thailand is 200 days a year. So in that, so suddenly they have to stay at home. And the school try really hard to bring in some instruction. So it means that, the time that they used to spend for learning, has declined on that. The second one is ineffective teaching and learning approaches. For all, I think we all faced it, that the teachers now struggle. What should I do, with the remote teaching and learning? So, and we also have, been developed quite a few approaches to this. The third one is insufficient learning support resource. The fourth one is education disparity, as well as the fifth one is socio-economic, emotional and mental health effect. I think this is from what we happen and lesson learned for us, due to there are a lot of inadequate, both learning tool, resource, and some problem with disruption of children, especially for the mother tongue, which is not taught, having them learning alone at home without, any support, that will, be the effect of unlearn a lot. The family condition, also is, we have very, compared to the whole Thailand, not even, I think 50% that the family is willing or have learned to support the student but this why we come up with a lot of parents, learning support, that they'll be able to help the children. All through this, OBEC has designed what we have 5 on, right? Online, on site, on hand, on demand, and on air. So to fit, where our students are, where they're located, but still we know that is not enough for this. So can I go to the second slide? Okay. So from that, what are we planning? We are talking about, and this is related to the Bangkok statement, that we really need to know every single child to be able to provide, support for them, the whole child development, not only, in one way. For in that, we come up with some information system, to do and trying to get at the learner. And the second thing is when talking about harmonized learning approach for each individual student, that is thing. Up to until 2 years, there's a lot of learning from the teacher side. When sometimes we're talking about learning loss, the other way we're talking about learning gain, from the teacher as a way of the ability to use technology device and also ability to learn to know more in detail about their student on this. And we have a just teaching approach to fit each individual student, as well as increase foundational and essential support to promote learning. In this way, every sector of us is come up with, trying very hard and sharing a lot of experience in helping students with different needs and different situation of learning. And this is how we have been doing until then. Yeah, thank you.
It was very interesting to really understand what the situation was and how how Thailand put in place different kinds of strategies. Now, let me pass the floor to Dr. Lee, please.
한국에서는 코로나19로 인해 학교 휴교와 온라인 계약, 원격 수업 병행이 지속됨에 따라서 학생의 등교일 수가, 교사와 학부모들은 원격 수업으로 학생 간 학습 격차가 커졌다고 생각하고, 또 실제로도 학업 성취도 평가 결과 교과별 성취 수준이 낮아지고 기초학력 미달 학생 비율이 증가하는 경향이 나타났습니다. 교사들은 학생 간 학습 격차를 해소하기 위해서는 등교 수업을 위한 오프라인 보충 지도가 필요하다고 지적하고 있습니다. 즉 코로나19로 학습 결손과 학습 격차가 심화되었고, 또 학교 휴교와 온라인 계약이 양질의 교육 제공 및 접근에 한계가 있는 것으로 확인이 된 것입니다. 또한 코로나19로 학교가 단순히 학습뿐만이 아니라 학생들의 사회성과 정서 그리고 건강 발달에 상당한 영향을 미치고 있다는 것이 반증되었습니다. 학교 휴교 및 온라인 수업으로 인해 학습 결손과 격차가 심화되었을 뿐만 아니라 학생의 심리 정서 건강에 교육관계 형성이 어려워지고, 또 이로 인해 학교 생활 만족도가 낮아지고 또 사회성 저하가 우려되는 상황입니다. 이와 함께 운동량 감소로 인한 비만율 증가와 신체 건강 악화도 나타난 현실입니다. 이에 교육부는 학습, 심리, 정서 등 결손을 적극적으로 극복하고 학교가 일상을 되찾기 위한 종합적인 교육회복 대책을 수립했습니다. 모든 학생의 코로나19 극복을 지원하기 위한 교육회복 종합방안 기본계획이 바로 그것입니다. 특히 적시성, 종합성, 책무성을 주요 전략으로 삼고 코로나19로 인한 결손 극복은 물론 더 나은 교육으로 도약하는 것을 목표로 하고 있습니다. 첫 번째 전략인 적시성은 결손이 누적되지 않도록 즉시 시행이 가능하고 효과적인 방법부터 적기 지원한다는 것입니다. 두 번째 전략인 종합성은 학습은 물론 심리 정서 사회성 결손을 면밀히 파악하고 개인별 상황에 맞는 종합적인 회복을 지원한다는 것이고, 마지막 참모성은 미래 세대에 대한 책임감을 가지고 중앙 및 지방 정부가 협업하여 교육 회복에 총력을 기울인다는 것입니다. 즉 코로나19로 인해서 학습뿐만 아니라 심리, 정서, 사회성 등의 결손이 확인되어 이에 대한 종합적이고 적극적인 지원이 절실하고, 이에 교육부는 결손을 접기에 종합적으로 중앙정부와 지방정부의 협업 속에 총력 지원하도록 대책을 마련한 것입니다. 또 한편에서 중앙과 지방정부를 중앙과 지방정부를 비롯한 모든 교육 주체가 함께하는 교육 회복을 위해서 국가와 지역 단위 추진 체계를 구축하였습니다. 국가 단위 교육 회복을 위한 과제 발굴과 지역 추진위원회를 지원하는 등 교육 회복을 총괄하기 위한 교육회복위원회를 구성하여 운영하고, 시도교육청 단위 과제 발굴과 관리, 또 추진 및 단위학교 운영을 운영하였습니다. 더불어 모든 학생의 교육 회복을 위해서 2022년까지 중앙정부 예산에 약 8천억 원을 투입하여 집중적으로 총력 지원하는 한편, 2024년까지 총 3조 원을 투입해서 과밀학급을 해소하는 등 교육 여건 개선에 대한 정책적 노력도 계획하고 있습니다. 네, 이상입니다.
And also the fact that respective resources were put towards the plan and also towards future improvement of learning environments. So now I would like to hand over to Dr. Umarov to hear your contribution to the first question. Thank you very much. Dr. Umarov?
Здравствуйте, уважаемые участники. Во время пандемии, как и все, можно сказать, что определенной долей уверенности наша страна, можно сказать, они как бы понятие цифрового обучения отсутствовало в нашей стране до начала пандемии в 2020 году. До пандемии, поэтому у нас, так как отсутствовало понимание цифрового образования как на уровне нормативной базы, так и на уровне непосредственных бенефициаров системы образования, это ученики, это педагоги. Худо или бедно, во время карантина система образования в стране пыталась не прерывать образовательный процесс, в то же время адаптируясь к новым таким условиям, новым вызовам, можно сказать, обучаясь на ходу, принимая где-то зарубежный опыт, где-то апробируя свои наработки. Но насколько это хорошо получилось, это, конечно, другой вопрос. В то же время хотел бы отметить, что в распространенном в то время ЮНИСЕФом глобальном информационном бюллетене по образованию во время COVID Кыргызская республика был признан одной из стран, которая добилась значительного прогресса в доступе именно к дистанционному обучению. Но со своей стороны, при всем при этом, объективно перевод системы образования Кыргызстана в дистанционный формат выявил такие проблемы, как, например, нехватка гаджетов в семьях, особенно в многодетных семьях, отсутствие мобильных телефонов, слабый сигнал интернета, вовсе в отдаленных регионах отсутствие интернета, психологическая неготовность родителей взять на себя полный контроль за обучением детей, так как они дома находились. Но в итоге получилось так, что была обнаружена проблема, что к тому моменту некомпетентность, именно недостаточный уровень квалификации по цифровым навыкам учителей, использование цифровых технологий, информационно-коммуникационных технологий. Вынужденный переход системы образования в 100 лет на всех уровнях, дистанционный формат обучения во время COVID вызвал необходимость изучения проблем и достижений вообще цифровизации обучения в стране. И COVID-19, можно сказать, вынудил пересмотреть методы и формы обучения в образовательных организациях нашей страны. Результатом последнего стало нахождение определенного опыта в организации учебного процесса в удаленном формате. И вот в этой связи, как вы, наверное, согласитесь, цифровое образование – это использование цифровой инфраструктуры для передачи систематизированных знаний и навыков непосредственно ученикам. И вставал вопрос, естественно, встает вопрос, существует ли четкое понимание, как интегрировать цифровые инструменты в процесс обучения школьников именно в постковидный период. Во время ковида в стране в тот момент был принят, разработан антикризисный план, где были расписаны на тот момент определенные задачи, которые необходимо реализовать для того, чтобы, первое, обеспечить доступ всех детей к дистанционному обучению и решению некоторых связанных с этим проблем. А после пандемии, когда дети стали возвращаться к занятию уже непосредственно офлайн форматом, к тому моменту была разработана постковидный такой антикризисный план, где было поставлено некоторые задачи, как продолжить учебный процесс мягко и в то же время какие меры необходимо принять для восполнения тех пробелов, которые были допущены во время дистанционного онлайн-обучения. И в соответствии с этим, если вкратце посмотреть, страна относительно маленькая, речь идет о тех пробелах знаний у почти 1 300 000 учеников. И также состояла задача, как формировать соответствующие навыки у учителей для того, чтобы провести коррекционные такие занятия именно для восполнения тех пробелов знаний и навыков, которые были допущены во время COVID. Речь сейчас идет порядка около 80 000 учителей. Для них в постковидный период были организованы различные курсы. Также было принято уже для системы образования, можно сказать, на страновом уровне коррекционная программа, где посредством данной коррекционной программы была попытка, во-первых, для учителей формировать такой план их действий по восполнению, во-вторых, применить некоторые уже полученные опыт во время пандемии цифровые технологии, как бы гибридный формат, для того, чтобы ученики могли, помимо тех занятий, которые они проводят в школе, также могли с помощью технологий, с помощью различных площадок, которые в свое время, во время COVID были запущены для системы образования. И на данный момент как раз-таки также была инициатива, можно сказать, с учетом тех вызовов, которые столкнулась система образования нашей страны во время пандемии. С того момента идет полная инвентаризация всех нормативных законов, нормативных правовых документов в системе образования, и как раз таки туда уже введены некоторые нормы, где четко разъясняется, где определяется, можно сказать, дальнейшая стратегия, политика по применению современных цифровых технологий, по формированию уже пересмотренных методик обучения, уже с применением гибридного подхода. И на данный момент можно полагать, что есть определенная политика для того, чтобы система образования и бенефициары этой системы образования были готовы к различным кризисным вызовам. И помимо этого, можно сказать, что были пересмотрены стандарты, да, то есть содержание некоторых программ по содержанию школьного образования, где акцентировано внимание, чтобы уже с малых лет у детей формировать соответствующие навыки именно в плане информационно-коммуникационных технологий, чтобы они могли также иметь возможность уметь обучаться на основе информационных, образовательных, электронных порталов. И также было пересмотрено содержание самой подготовки учителей. Это уже где университеты занимаются, их куррикулумы, содержание тоже пересматривается для того, чтобы у учителей, которые ведут свои предметы, были соответствующие навыки по использованию различных современных технологий в целях формирования лучшего результата обучения. Спасибо.
Dr. Umarov, that was very interesting to hear from you how first of all, you dealt with the crisis, given that Kyrgyzstan seems to have been rather unprepared. I think you described it very well. The situation of connectivity, the situation of training of teachers, the difficulties of vulnerable groups, in particular rural areas, that really required a lot of investment from the part of the government. But then also what you learned from the crisis and how you use these best practices in the adjustment program and the learning recovery, and how you actually have started to undertake policy reform and curriculum reform, including for teachers. So that was very interesting. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to go back to you individually with specific questions, starting with, again, Dr. Lee. You mentioned in your intervention the comprehensive plan for recovery of education, which you quickly described. And we believe this is such an interesting plan that it would be great for the audience to hear a bit more about it. And if you could tell us a bit more, the details and how it was actually enacted since July 21 and what you've seen in terms of its rollout. Thank you.
네, 교육회복 종합방안은 모든 학습, 심리정서 등 결손을 종합적으로 지원하기 위한 대책으로 지역 특성에 따른 탄력적인 대응을 위해서 시도교육 투자 자율적으로 추진되고 있습니다. 결손 회복을 위한 주요 내용은 학습 결손 등 종합적인 진단과 학습 결손 회복 지원, 그리고 몸과 마음의 회복 지원입니다. 첫째, 학습 결손 등 종합적인 진단은 단위학교별 학생을 대상으로 정서, 건강 등 교수에게 지역과 학교 여건에 맞게 자율적으로 종합 진단하는 것입니다. 교사의 관찰과 상담, 인공지능 학습 심리 시스템, 정서행동 특성 검사 등 기반 도구를 활용하여 학생의 결손을 진단하고 학생의 특성을 고려한 다양한 회복 프로그램과 연계합니다. 둘째, 학습 결손 회복 지원은 학습 결손을 겪은 학생 개개인의 수준과 희망에 따라 학생 맞춤형으로 지원하여 실질적인 교육 기회를 확대하고 학습 역량을 강화하는 것입니다. 모든 학생을 대상으로 교실 안팎, 방과 후 및 방학 동안 전방위적인 지원을 하는 것이 특징입니다. 구체적으로 코로나19로 인한 학습 결손과 격차 해소를 위해 방과 후와 방학 중에 국가 보충 집중 프로그램, 튜터링, 학습 컨설팅 등을 통해 학습을 보충하고 기초학력 향상을 위해서 시도 및 학교 여건에 따라서 협력 수업 운영 학교를 확대하고 희망하는 등 모든 학교에 두드림 학교를 전면적으로 운영하고 있습니다. 이 두드림 학교는 학교 단위 다중 지원팀을 통해 복합적 요인으로 학습이 어려운 학생에게 학습 지도 및 정서행동 상담을 지원하는 정책 학교입니다. 또한 학교 역량만으로 도움이 어려운 학생의 집중적인 지원을 위해서 모든 교육청에 학습 종합 클리닉 센터 또는 기초학력 지원센터를 설치 확대하여 집중 지원합니다. 셋째, 몸과 마음 회복 지원은 일반 학생과 고위험군 학생 모두에게 상황에 맞는 심리 정서를 지원하고 사회성 함량과 신체 활동 활성화를 위한 다양한 프로그램을 제공해서 학생의 몸과 마음 건강의 총체적인 회복을 도모하는 것입니다. 구체적으로 학생의 심리 정서 결손 회복을 돕기 위해 학교 단위 상담 지원과 윗센터, 외부 상담 기관 연계를 통해 학생 맞춤형 단계별 상담을 지원하고 심리 정서 치료가 필요한 취약계층에게 치료비 지원, 방문 의료 서비스 등을 지원하고 있습니다. 또한 학생의 사회성과 신체 건강 결손 회복을 위해서 기존의 단위학교별 학생활동을 강화하고 학교 스포츠 클럽 등 신체 활동을 지원하고 있습니다. 특히 코로나19로 인한 초등학생과 중학생의 학업, 정서 발달 및 신체 건강에 대한 생애 누적 결손을 파악하기 위해서 중장기 종단 조사를 통해서 학생 맞춤형 지원 방안을 마련하는 데 활용할 계획입니다. 이러한 교육회복 종합 방안은 새롭게 추진이 필요한 정책, 예컨대 교과 보충 집중 프로그램 등을 신규 과제로 추진하고 또 한편에서는 기존의 교육복지 정책의 일환으로 추진되었던 예컨대 학습 종합 클리닉 센터, 학교 상담 등을 확대하고 강화하여 시도교육청과 단위학교에서 혼란과 부담을 최소화하는 방향으로 설계된 점에서 강점이 있다고 봅니다. 또한 정책의 성과 차원에서 코로나19로 인한 학생의 학업, 정서 발달 및 신체 건강에 대한 생애 누적 결과 조사를 종단 조사로 설계해서 맞춤형 지원에 활용하고자 한 점에서 큰 의의가 있다고 봅니다. 다만 코로나19로 인해 위험한 상황에서 더 불리하거나 취약해지는 학생들을 위한 교육복지, 돌봄, 사회정서 안전망이 촘촘하게 구축될 필요와 그 중요성이 다시 한번 드러났다고 봅니다. 이에 위험 상황에서 더 유연하고 탄력적으로 적용할 수 있는 교육 안전망 구축에 대한 앞으로의 더 정책적 노력이 필요하다고 봅니다.
Dr. Lee, this was very interesting to hear how comprehensive your recovery plan truly is and really talking about recovery of mind and body. I think that is a very important concept. And also speaking at the very end about the importance of an education safety net to be ready for any kind of future disruptions. So let me move again to Dr. Umarov. You already mentioned the digitalization process in the Kyrgyz Republic during COVID-19 school closures and beyond. So can you tell us a bit more about the very specific lessons learned from this experience and how you believe digitalization can support an effective recovery of learning losses? Over to you. Thank you.
Да, здесь, если
Before you speak, I was told by the organizers that we're running late. Could the speakers stay within the time frame of 3 minutes in their answers? Sorry, Dr. Umarov.
Да, спасибо. Ну, если вкратце сказать, в то время, во время ковида, чтобы реагировать на вызовы, ну, на мой взгляд, основная работа была как бы параллельно проведена во время ковида. То есть были запущены несколько образовательных порталов, где загружались весь контент программы, школьные программы для всех уровней. И в то же время параллельно приходилось тогда и проводить вебинары для учителей, какую наиболее подходящую методику преподавать в удаленном формате. И в то же время параллельно приходилось готовить, снимать именно такие видеоуроки и готовить электронные учебные материалы уже в электронном варианте. Ну, так как это все параллельно шло, и в то же время я бы хотел бы просто остановиться на том, что у нас категория учеников можно классифицировать по нескольким таким группам. Да? То есть те категории учеников, которые имеют все необходимые условия для онлайн, удаленного формата обучения. В то же время есть категория учеников, у которых нет инфраструктуры, которые могли бы получить элементарные там материалы по теме. Это касается как раз-таки отдаленно расположенных регионов. И в то же время есть такая категория учеников из многодетных семей, где очень даже трудно, в некоторых районах трудно дают телевизионные сигналы. Но в то время нами было подобрано такой гибридный механизм организации дистанционного обучения. То есть был запущен единый национальный портал, куда были загружены весь контент, единая площадка для всех учеников, для той категории, которых имеют интернет, гаджеты, мобильную связь. И в то же время этот же контент был запущен через телевидение именно для тех отдаленных сел, где слабый интернет. Просто я бы хотел вкратце сказать, какие, да, непременно я согласен, я смогу смело сделать вывод, цифровизация, она и в то время, и сейчас помогает в какой-то мере, в значительной мере, можно сказать, повышению качества образования посредством предоставления более широкого контента, более широкого обзора ресурсов. Правда, нынешняя молодежь с помощью мобильных приложений, они имеют доступ к дополнительным материалам. Также можно сказать, что они могут уже в период пандемии, наверное, все согласитесь со мной, что репетиторство, она тоже имеет уже другое. Да? В удаленном формате они могут заниматься уже более углубленно, готовиться к поступлению в вузы и так далее. И в то же время, если раньше, до пандемии, курсы повышения учителей мы проводили в офлайн формате, там охват очень маленький, а сейчас посредством вебинаров, посредством цифровых технологий можно организовать такие масштабные вебинары, масштабные семинары для того, чтобы своевременно уже сразу же дать соответствующие навыки. Исходя из этого, я бы сказал, этим система образования не останавливалась. И очень важный момент, как раз таки с учетом того, чтобы обеспечить доступ к образованию именно лиц ограниченного здоровья, возможности здоровья, сейчас страна хочет запустить единую национальную электронную школу. То есть электронная школа – это в удаленном формате будут преподаваться весь стандарт, вся программа, школьная программа для тех детей, которые по состоянию здоровья не могут посещать школу. С одной стороны, эту проблему решает, и с другой стороны, такая школа решает более качественному контенту именно таких школ, которые расположены в отдаленных регионах и где есть некоторые моменты нехватки учителей. Ну, вкратце хотел бы сказать, но как бы, если во время пандемии была потеря каких-то знаний, но с учетом опыта сейчас, с учетом применения цифровых технологий, цифровых навыков, в какой-то мере можно сделать уже, как бы улучшить уже качество своеобразия. Ну, хотелось бы это только добавить. Спасибо.
For this interesting contribution in terms of digital allowing to reach vulnerable groups and also allowing to tutor teachers in a larger scale and therefore also contributing to learning recovery. Now let me move to Dr. Nampha. So one of the key strategies of Thailand for re-engaging learners in education is the initiative Bring the Kids Back to School. So can you tell us a little bit more about this strategy and how it's rolled out in the context of learning recovery? Thank you. Over to you, please. It's muted. You're muted. Sorry.
Unmute. Okay, now.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank
So
you.
can someone bring up the presentation so to make it short? I am using now the presentation, the official presentation of the from the Ministry of Education about this project, bringing students back to school. So let me can I have next slide? You see my minister. Okay, so in this process, we're talking about the government also focus on not leave no one behind, but in education we are trying to see we're gonna have education cover every single student. But last year from November to December, we found that there are some about 238,000 students are not in the school. Why? They should be in the school. So so we set up this project and did it for the round one. We are able to bring students back about 117,000. So there's another 121,000, which in this presentation, you can see how it works in this project. In the government level, we have basic education, vocational education, non-formal education, and private education together on the right side. On the left side, because student is everywhere and related to several kind of agency. That's why we make MOU with 12 agencies who are in the local area, both in the center and local area. In this MOU, it means that everyone will help looking for students who are not at school while they should be in the school and provide support. And at the ministry level, we set up what we call project coordination center to be the center who link to all kinds of activity that happen. And then we have provincial level, education service area level, while also at the school level. That every level they have a committee and they have regularly a meeting and receive the information about what tracking students. Next slide, please. So, okay. So this is some statistics that we are now working. We have been working on, to this year, and this is the statistic. The latest one is on September 23. The dropout student is 121,642. And now we were able to get them back to school is 100 and 4,000 students. The remaining is 17,520. In this, there are students in private and in vocational, some about 8,000. And in OBEC, it's about 794,000, and non-formal education is 8,326. So this is kind of where students that are not into school, and we are working on it. Okay. And next slide will present the sample of how the information is taking place. So this is from Basic Education Commission. We have tracking students back to school. We have 20,000. We have tracking and not found, going to visit to the field, and still they are not back to school yet. There are some we are looking for it, but still not find it. And there are about 5,000 that are tracking in process. And in this, we have number of students who die. And this is die, it means, out of the 9 million students, there were, there have some disease and there have some accident and things. But this is the number that we are now found why they are not in school. So the next slide will go to about vocational, non-formal education. So maybe you can go very fast. This is the sample of how we track, we put in information for every unit that responsible will know and be able to, to be seriously looking for it, right? So we also have with the non-formal education. And next, please. Okay. So in that, what we found as a problem and obstacle, First one, we unable to contact students due to oftenly move with family without notice. There are students, especially in the remote or in the city area where the family, moving because of finding the job. The second one also unsettled residency area. Some, stay in the camp, in the some industrial area or something. This is make it very difficult. The third one is student move with parents to the workplace that very far and inconvenient to come to school. This is why we need to make MOU with all 12 agencies, because they can help us find not only if they cannot come to school and they need some some vocational skill, then we can help them to do it. The fourth one is the agency information is insufficient to provide. Still, we're working on it because some of the area that information sharing is not consistent yet. So we are in the process of improving it. The fifth one is insufficient knowledge of operating and also still some limited budget. Next slide, please. So what is what we thinking, what should be some solution is, we need, 12 agencies, coordinate actively, seeing each other continuingly, so they can, looking and study the information and be able to help students. The second one is share student information with the Office of Registration Administration to find the student whose parents live in, the unsettlement place. We still have the registered student and unregistered student, and this OBEC and ministry take into account that it is our duty and responsibility, to help them, to give them opportunity to learn. The first one is there should be a coordinating unit to integrate operational and bring students back to school, Okay, and can we go to the last one? We think the success factor, is, somehow we need a strong commitment, and determination of the administrator. You have to make it into priority, and continue, follow up the work. Second one is the strong coordination between agencies, as well, because somehow we may actively in the first phase and then decline the activeness on that. Seriously, we'll visit, and intensity solve the problem, and this is, we need, we cannot work at the center or in the office. So we need to really, go and understand what happened in the field. The fifth one is implementing a big data, and this is what we also doing as we have. I think the ministry have developed the application and also the website about bringing students back to school, so people can use it as a way to report the work. The fifth one is that's what I have just said. The sixth one is strong student care system. Some on the other word, we're talking about student inference system that every school have, but we need to update and really make it work. And the last one is constantly working among the administrator, teacher, personnel, to support and bring students back home. It is the project that set up the awareness for everyone that education is very important and we need to help students back to school. All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this for the description of this very impressive initiative, which notwithstanding COVID is very important. How to bring back students that are out of school back to school, how to find them. I think that is clearly a major obstacle, right, which you described very well. So in the interest of time, because we are a little bit over the time allocated for this particular session, I would propose to cut the next question that we had planned to ask you, but go straight to the questions of the audience. So let me just pick a few of them and then direct them to the presenters. We have a question from Pakistan, also referring to other emergency situations in Pakistan itself. And so Hussein Kawaja would like to know if you could elaborate a bit more on what tools or techniques are used in combating psychological and emotional stress. So maybe we could address that question to Dr. Lee, who has referred a lot to the socio-emotional well-being in Korea.
한국에서는 기존에 사회 정서 행동 특성 검사라는 거를 통해서 학생들을 주기적으로 검사를 했었습니다. 그래서 이것들을 코로나19 네, 한국에서는 주기적으로 교육부와 시도교육청에서 사회정서 행동 특성 검사를 통해서 학생들의 사회성이나 정서 검사를 실시를 해오고 있었습니다. 그래서 코로나19 상황에서도 이 검사를 활용을 하고 또 교사의 관찰이라던가 또 학교 상담사를 통해서 상담을 하면서 진단을 하고 있습니다.
Counselors being key. So let me ask a question to Thailand. Here the question that is asked, in what way did Thailand measure learning loss? For example, what levels of education have been highly affected, but really what areas of learning has been determined to be lost? For example, reading and math, and what is the magnitude of the learning loss that has been measured?
We have prepared. It is like the assessment. When students come back to school, this is a way for teacher to really know how much the learning remain in the student, so they can start from there. That is the thing that is a very strong policy that every school need to really know your student, before the teaching. And the focus on the first term actually is for the foundation. You need to make students back for the literacy and numeracy on that. And the level that quite lost in terms of the foundation is the early primary level, and that. But still, we found that in the remote area, since the student is not using the natural language at home, they still need to. Our Secretary General is we have a meeting with the director of each education service area that the first term, you need to really have the student, relax and trying to bring back to school and get used to school again, because they have lost for about almost 2 years. So this is the way that we are. We focus on helping, and the school need to have student information individually to provide the support on that.
Okay, thank you. And then one last question, which I would like to direct to Dr. Umarov, is you are being asked, for children and parents who do not know how to use technology, how can you help children to learn well?
Данная такого рода проблема, как я ранее говорил, была. И тогда было как? Были задействованы, мы тогда создали, если не ошибаюсь, штаб, условное название штаб по IT-поддержке. То есть во время пандемии любой ученик или преподаватель, у него были какие-то трудности в плане использования, в плане настройки, в плане подбора инструмента для обратной связи с учителями как со стороны ученика и учителей как со стороны уже, чтобы отправить документы. Мы тогда были задействованы студенты старших курсов, все специалисты по IT-направлениям. Мы, когда всем было объявлено каналы коммуникации, и в то время они сразу же оказывали техническую поддержку в этом плане. И помимо этого были организованы, у нас в стране есть организация, это парк высоких технологий называется, где зарегистрированы все IT-компании нашей страны, начиная от мобильных операторов, интернет-провайдеров и все, как государственные, как и частные IT-компании. И я помню, тогда мы организовывали целую серию вебинаров, которые привлекали эти компании, и эти компании посредством вебинаров проводили такие маленькие тематические мастер-классы по каждому вопросу, как для студентов университетов, как и для студентов, учеников школ, как и для преподавателей университетов, как и для учителей школы. Вот в этом плане намного, на мой взгляд, за короткое время и во время пандемии, и после пандемии такого рода инструменты были нами использованы для того, чтобы у них сразу же восполнять, формировать соответствующие цифровые навыки.
Thank you very much. There are more questions in the chat, but I apologize to the participants and also to the three presenters that I will close the session here because we have 2 more sessions coming. And I definitely would like to give enough time to these presentations to also have sufficient time. So thank you very much to all 3 of you. I think that was an extremely rich discussion and presentations, and we all have learned a lot from you, and we'll continue discussion going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Margaret, and all the panelists. Now please turn off your cameras. Now let's quickly move to the session 2, Safe Return to Schools for All Learners, which will be moderated by Dr. Eun-Young Kim, Director of the Office of International Cooperation, KEDI. Again, please note that the simultaneous interpretation services are provided for Thai, Russian, and Korean in this session. Dr. Kim, over to you.
Thank you, Hyun. This is second session 2. I'm a moderator for the session. We are about 40 minutes behind the schedule. So I need to meet the challenge, more challenges of meet that timeline. And should I hear something. Okay. So This session, second session, is about we're going to hear national cases because we hear the national cases before, national policies in the first session. And we want to see that how these cases implementation, how these policies are implemented in school settings or education settings. We have 3 presenters today. And the very first presenter is Ulzan Ospanova, Director, Information Analytics Center, Ministry of Education from Kazakhstan. And Ms. Ambat, Assistant Secretary, Alternative Learning System, Department of Education from Philippines, is unable to attend due to some circumstances. And so the second presenter will be Ms. Jae-hee Kim, Supervisor, Gyeonggi Office of Education from Republic of Korea. And the final presenters will be Rina Thapa, Chief of Counselor, from Ministry of Education from Bhutan. So without any delay, we're gonna start the presentation from Ms. Ospanova. Ms. Ospanova. You need to unmute your speaker, please. Or mic, unmute your mic, please. And while she is unmuting her mic, please make sure that each participant has just 10 minutes for your presentations. Thank you.
So, share screen is enabled. I'm glad to be a part of this discussion here today, and I'll be presenting Kazakhstan case.
Hello, Ms. Ospanova.
Hello, can you hear me?
Somehow we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me?
Should we?
So I enabled my mic. Can you hear me? Please, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Okay, thank you.
So I'll be presenting Safe Return to School, Learning Loss Recovery, and Education After Pandemics in Kazakhstan. First, let's get down to history. On March the 2nd, we declared the state of emergency. And from April the 1st, 2020, Kazakhstani schools started the quarter term distantly. So all the schools were closed during this quarter term. In May 25, the schools completed the school year, and the next school year, which was full academic year 2020.
Ms. Ospanova, could you share your presentation file, PPT slides with us? Because we cannot see your file. Or other technicians from UNESCO Bangkok or any host, if you can open her presentation file.
No, because we had that issue during the technical. Once again.
How about this? Let me suggest maybe Ms. Ospanova.
So can you see my presentation?
Oh, now we can see yours. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Please begin.
So Kazakhstan is a huge country, and there are a bit disparities between regions. So we adopted the international experience and cases from other countries and opted for using several distant learning technologies at once. During the first term, when nobody went to school, we used all the variety of attack that was available at the moment. So we used internet streaming lessons, internet recorded lessons, TV and radio was also several national channels, especially for the kids, just video streamed lessons, especially for primary school students at kids channels, and that was done for those
areas where digital learning and internet penetration wasn't that good as in other regions. And there was traditional mode beginning from September 2020, the second year. Traditional mode was done in remote schools with small number of students. We have that a large, considerable amount of schools where the number of children attending that school starts from only 8 students for the whole school. So for these small schools, as the risk of the pandemics wasn't that much, the decision was adopted to let them continue their education in traditional mode. And for those areas, very, very remote schools, there are several only less than 1% of children were receiving educational materials via posts. The whole academic year in 2021-22 school year, the schools opened in the traditional format, and Kazakhstan had taken considerable measures to ensure safety at schools. That included social distancing and limited number of students in classrooms, not more than 15 students at the beginning when pandemics were prominent, and we had that number of new illness cases, like over 1,000 a day. So over 7,000 schools opened their doors to the 3.4 million children. And we did considerable amount of work organizing scheduled breaks, organizing schedule that in such a way that children didn't see anyone and meet anyone and contact with anyone except their classmates in their own grade. And we did considerable efforts towards teachers' vaccination. At the beginning of the school year, 95% were vaccinated, and now the rates are 98%. Mask wearing regime and disinfection and sanitary norms were also adopted in Kazakhstan. Another thing is, when coming to learning loss recovery, for Kazakhstan, a huge challenge was an attempt to measure learning loss, what actually happened. And first, learning loss attempts focused on formal assessment at schools, daily marks and term final assessment marks. And the results showed that during pandemics, I'm showcasing the third and the fourth quarter of the pandemic year. Higher the students' educational achievements, that daily marks and term final marks demonstrated higher results overall. But here, if you look at the graphs to the left, you see that the data, the structure of data is bimodal. So we have two peaks, and the smaller peak demonstrates that number of students that actually were not doing good before the pandemics. And if you see this peak, the smaller peak, highlighted in red, had moved to the left. That means those children who did not good at before the pandemics, did not learn well, or did not achieve the good results in formal assessments, they began, so the things went worse for them, not better. And for other, the larger amount, or more than about 80% of children started to get much better marks. So we see that more prominent divide between the high academic performance and struggling students, And the research showed no statistically significant difference between urban and rural students in formal assessment analysis. But areas for improvement identified during these first attempts to measure learning loss at schools was led us to conclusions that we need targeted work with groups at risk, that struggling students, and need for better assessment practices, because we reported children felt and teachers felt there was learning loss, but the marks, the assessment practices showcase the other thing. Another huge amount of work was done by international organizations. Let me thank UNESCO, all the UN agencies, UNICEF, World Bank, and Asia Development Bank that helped our country and put efforts to help us recover and assess learning loss. Learning loss assessment by World Bank group estimates that there will be 8 points drop further, and they calculated that the difference between vulnerable students and students who did well with good social economic backgrounds will be getting even wider. The gap will get wider. And the latest result from the efforts done by my own organization, Information Analytics Center, was an attempt to measure learning loss, quantify it. And we did it by a huge survey of teachers, and we calculated that over 60% of teachers report occurrence of learning loss. And the calculated average learning loss perception in percentage of the material learned is 34.9%. In upper secondary, it's higher. 76% of teachers report they had to spend additional time in current academic year for repetition of the material taught during distance learning. 45% estimated as 1 or 2 weeks spent for that, and 31% 3 or 4 weeks. And if we follow international methodology in calculating this learning loss, so Kazakhstani learning loss is Kazakhstan compared to the traditional learning format during a year is approximately from 3 to 4 months or 12.25 weeks. And we have to recover these losses to ensure that generation will be as effective as the previous ones. And another result from this learning loss estimation is that vulnerable groups, learning loss is more severe with vulnerable students. Here you can see the table where we showed, like teachers showed how many students of vulnerable groups do they have in their classes, and estimated perception of learning loss for each case of number. So growth in learning loss, for example, if in class there are less than 10% of students, the learning loss for struggling students struggling to learn started from 30%, but in classes where the number of that students is more than 60%, this learning loss grows to 53%. And this is evident among all the vulnerable groups of students. Students with special educational needs goes up to 49% disadvantaged backgrounds, more than 50, approximately to 60%. And those children who misbehaved, they had the most severe learning losses, which amounts up to 66%. So actually, for disadvantaged group, this learning loss shall be, recovery measures shall be more targeted. Here's the rapid framework, and let me just briefly tell what Kazakhstan did in all of these areas. So the first one is reach. We managed to reopen schools and keep them open. In Kazakhstan, it was a gradual process. Children and parents were given freedom to choose the mode in 2020-21. Primary level and pre-graduate students went to school on voluntary basis in traditional mode. So it was offline traditional studying for these categories of students. In 21 and 22, all schools reopened, and we managed to keep up to sanitary requirements and did considerable work for teachers' vaccinations. Back to school campaigns were also arranged in Kazakhstan that were mostly awareness raising campaigns, like informing teachers and students how to go to school, what they will need to do, teachers vaccinations campaign and sanitary requirements. And we also established awareness raising campaigns explaining parents and teachers what to do if there is a case of corona disease in a classroom and how to act. Cash transfers to poor families, cash support for those who lost jobs because of COVID was around one-third of average salary in Kazakhstan. There were also social care services like Road to School program and Psiabuch. So when children from vulnerable families and low-income families receive funding for clothes, textbooks, school supplies, etc. Early warning system to identify. Currently, there are several projects. This early warning system was a new thing for Kazakhstan, and we'll talk about it in more detail further. In terms of ensuring access to learning losses at national and subnational level, as I've told you, there have been several significant research attempted to assess learning loss, quantify learning loss, and develop relevant and adequate learning loss recovery measures. We will talk about it a bit later, and provide teachers with tools for classroom level management. That is the area for further improvement. Not much done in this direction in Kazakhstan because we don't have that classroom level measurement tools or technologies or nothing except methodological support and guidelines for teachers. When we come to setting priorities and teaching the fundamentals, we did the adjustment of curriculum. Adjusted curriculum was during pandemics and then later summer classes to recompensate the loss, additional consultations. Both the previous and current academic years were still recovering, and we split this recovery like in time term because we had 2 weeks of additional summer classes last year, and this summer we will have them as well. Prioritizing numeracy in literacy, functional literacy, and soft skills was the area of focus for Kazakhstan before the pandemic. We shifted to new educational content because Kazakhstani school children showcased decline in PISA result. And we, regarding the socio-emotional skills. Kazakhstan established psychological support hotlines for almost for all education stakeholders, for children, for parents and teachers. And we managed to focus instruction on closing the gaps. Additional activities including private and group consultations for the students at schools, summer camps at schools, as I've already mentioned. In terms of increasing the efficiency of instruction, there was a huge campaign for teachers, courses for teachers. Around 42,000 of teachers has passed their courses learning to teach distantly. They were centralized courses, and there was huge efforts learning from peers. I don't know, teachers themselves established groups in social media where they shared their experiences everywhere.
Ms. Uspanova,
I'm sorry.
Could you just expedite your presentation, please?
Okay.
Maybe just about 3 more minutes, please, if you can.
3 more minutes. Okay.
3 or 5, 3 to 5 more minutes.
Yeah.
Thank
if we showcase the best, where we did the best is retention in schools, and that's only because there were some I don't know, prerequisites for that in Kazakhstani education system. In Kazakhstan, secondary education is compulsory, and there are legislative and institutional and business processes already established for that to keep children at school. So daily attendance records are showcased in Kundilik. This is electronic journal filled in by class supervisor and subject teachers for each student every day. And more than 10 days of non-attendance without reasoning cause further actions to get the students back to school. We have that institution of social care counselor at school. We have district police officer assigned to each school, and we have social care services officers which do not report to the Ministry of Education, but to the Ministry of Social Care. And they have divided responsibilities, and each of them knows what to do if a child is not visiting school. All these measures helped Kazakhstan to keep those high retention rates and no significant growth in dropout numbers during the pandemic. The actions, actually there were a few areas where Kazakhstan continue to work and will continue even if the pandemic is over. The first one is connectivity, because that digital divide and was, I don't know, I think for developing countries and countries like from our region, I guess the most pending and acute issues. So in connectivity, Kazakhstan joined the GIGA project, which is a global initiative. The mission of it to provide access and connect each child to internet, and through that to quality education all over the world. So far, 40 schools in Turkestan region where providers, internet services providers will not go will not go because of the feasibility, like it's not I don't know, profitable from their side. 40 schools were connected for the first time in Turkestan region with the GIGA project. Now my center is implementing huge activities to establish a country-level monitoring system of actual internet speed at schools. Another area was ICT competencies and further digitalization. ICT competencies was a pending issue, and now actually this COVID pandemics was a challenge, but it was also stimulus to get better. And during pandemics, the student computer ratio raised from 4 children to 1 computer, raised up to 4 children to 1 computer at schools. And teachers' competencies improved a lot. They learned to learn streaming platforms, digital tools, and even started to provide digital content for education. Well-being is another area of focus, and I'll be talking about huge efforts focusing vulnerable groups of students. Parental engagement got better. Financial and non-financial support measures were developed in Kazakhstan, and some of them were only during the pandemics, but most of them stayed in the system. Informed policy making due to further digitalization and learning loss recovery strategies, which is mostly extension of school years and additional lessons. And as I said, vulnerable groups are at focus. 9 out of 11 categories entitled to support and social care services, where children benefit directly or indirectly. UNESCO local office for Central Asian region in Almaty has launched another project which is a part of an even bigger project, Digital Family Cards, where we target those vulnerable students. First of all, it's accessibility to social care services, and another area of question is better monitoring and timely identification, even to provide proactive support. So I'm done. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Osmanova. I think I have to apologize not being able to take any questions unless you have a really burning questions. I think you can contact those individuals, those speakers or presenters individually at the contacted presented on the website. So let's move on to the next presenter, Ms. Jae-hee Kim. She's going to give us a presentation on bridging learning gaps and promoting the psychosocial well-being of students, the Korean case. Ms. Kim, please.
네, 안녕하세요. 경기도교육청 장학사 김재희입니다. 오늘 이 자리에서 여러분들에게 경기도교육청의 교육 사례를 공유할 기회를 가지게 되어서 영광스럽게 생각하고 있습니다. 오늘 발표에서는 코로나19로 인한 학습 격차 해소와 학생들의 심리, 사회적 행복의 증진을 위해서 경기도교육청이 어떠한 노력을 했는지를 중심으로 말씀드리려고 합니다. 우선 코로나19가 학생들의 학습 정서에 미친 영향을 살펴보고 교육부의 교육회복 종합방안과 이를 바탕으로 이루어진 경기도교육청의 교육회복 종합방안 운영 사례를 살펴보도록 하겠습니다. 우선 코로나19 학생 이후에 학생들의 학력의 변화를 보여주는 자료입니다. 교육부가 매년 중학교 3학년과 고등학교 2학년 학생을 대상으로 국어, 수학, 영어 과목에서 기초학력 미달 학생을 조사해 왔습니다. 3개 과목 모두에서 기초학력 미달 학생이 코로나 이전인 2019년에 비해서 크게 증가한 것을 볼 수가 있고요. 중학생들의 경우에는 2020년에 비해서 기초학력 미달 학생이 크게 늘었다가 21년에 약간 감소하는 듯 했지만 고등학생의 경우에는 2020년에 기초학력 미달 학생이 크게 늘고 또다시 21년에도 증가하는 것을 볼 수가 있습니다. 아마도 학습량이 많아지고 학습 내용이 어려워지는 고등학교에서 학습 결손의 누적이 회복이 좀 더 어려운 것 같아 보입니다. 네, 다음으로 코로나19가 한국 청소년에게 미친 심리적 영향을 조사한 결과입니다. 2020년에 여성가족부의 조사에 따르면 청소년들은 코로나19 이후에 일반적인 생활, 교우관계, 학교생활, 사회에 대한 신뢰, 직업에 대한 기대감 등 모든 측면에서 부정적으로 변화했다고 응답했습니다. 그 중에서도 학교 생활에서 부정적인 변화를 느낀다는 응답이 압도적으로 높게 나타났는데요. 코로나19로 인해 학교에 다니지 못했기 때문인 것으로 보입니다. 교육부와 교육청은 학생들의 학습 결손과 심리 정서 문제가 더 이상 심각해지는 것을 막기 위해서 2021년 6월부터 전면 등교 방침을 발표했습니다. 더불어서 이미 발생한 결손과 학습 격차를 완화하기 위해서 전면적인 지원 방안을 마련했습니다. 그것이 2021년 7월에 발표된 교육회복 종합방안이었습니다. 이는 전례가 없을 정도의 대규모 지원이었고요. 막대한 예산 투자와 더불어서 학습, 정신건강, 신체건강 전반을 아우르는 전방위적인 대책이었습니다. 교육회복 종합방안의 주요 과제는 다음의 3가지였습니다. 첫 번째는 교육 결손으로부터의 회복입니다. 이는 학습 지원, 심리, 사회적 건강과 사회성 회복으로 대부분의 일반 학생들에게 적용되는 것이었습니다. 두 번째는 유아, 직업계고 학생들과 다문화 학생 등 취약계층 학생들에 대해서 좀 더 촘촘한 맞춤형 지원을 하겠다는 것이었습니다. 마지막으로는 과밀학급 해소, 미래입 교육 인프라 구축으로 교육 환경을 개선하겠다는 내용이었고요. 이 중에서 오늘 여러분들께는 가장 많은 학생들한테 광범위하게 적용됐던 첫 번째 과제를 중심으로 말씀드리려고 합니다. 경기도교육청은 교육부의 교육회복 종합계획을 바탕으로 해서 경기도 교육회복 종합계획을 수립했습니다. 우리는 다음 4가지 영역의 지원 체제를 구축했고요. 첫 번째로 학습 결손 지원을 위해서 8,500만 달러에 달하는 막대한 예산을 편성했습니다. 소규모 교과 보충 수업, 다문화 학생 대상 한국어 보충 수업, 대학생 튜터를 활용한 개별 학습 지도 프로그램을 운영했습니다. 두 번째로는 심리 정서, 사회성 회복을 위한 프로그램을 운영했습니다. 이를 위해서 관계 형성을 위한 또래 활동, 코로나19로 인해 위축됐던 예술 활동을 활성화해서 사회성 회복과 정서 함양을 지원했습니다. 더불어서 학교 내 상담 교실을 중심으로 해서 다양한 학교 내 상담 활동을 운영하고 학생들에게 자연스럽게 상담에 참여할 수 있도록 했습니다. 심리사회성 회복 프로그램에는 두 번째로 많은 예산이 편성되었습니다. 세 번째로는 취약계층 학생들에 대한 지원 프로그램을 운영했고요. 마지막으로 교육회복 프로젝트를 효율적으로 운영하기 위해서 교육청 내에서 부서들이 칸막이를 없애고 협력하는 태스크포스 팀을 운영했습니다. 경기도 교육회복 프로젝트의 가장 큰 특징 중에 하나는 학교의 요구에 따라서 희망하는 분야에 자율적으로 예산을 편성해서 그에 따라 지원하고 학교의 자율성을 최대한 보장했다는 점입니다. 이는 교육회복이라는 가장 중요한 목표에 집중하기 위한 것이었고요. 이런 프로그램들이 어떻게 운영되었는지 조금 더 구체적으로 말씀드려 보려고 합니다. 첫 번째로 학교 역시 소규모 학생 교과 보충 활동을 말씀을 드리려고 하는데요. 학교 역시 학생과 학부모의 수요를 기반으로 모든 프로그램을 운영을 했습니다. 우선 교과 보충에서 어떤 과목을 배우고 싶은지, 과목 내에서 특히 어떤 내용을 학습하고 싶은지 학생들에게 물어봤고요. 수요 조사를 바탕으로 해서 교사들은 누가 무엇을 가르칠지를 협의하고 강좌를 개설했습니다. 희망하는 학생이 한 명이라도 있으면 최대한 수업을 개설해 주었고요. 수업하는 시간도 방과 후나 주말, 방학 등 학생들이 희망하는 시간에 운영했습니다. 운영 방식도 상황에 따라서 대면 수업, 온라인 수업 모두 가능하게 했습니다. 실제로 학교 내에서 과목별로 수천 가지의 다양한 수업들이 개설되었습니다. 여기에서는 그 일부 과목만 예시로 보여드리겠습니다. 학생들은 국어라는 과목 안에서도 문학, 현대시, 언어와 매체, 전통문학 등 다양한 과목을 신청했고요. 학생들이 스스로 자기에게 부족하다고 생각되는 부분이나 평소 더 배우고 싶었던 영역을 강좌로 개설해달라고 요청했던 겁니다. 이렇게 학생들에게 다양한 과목을 신청받아서 소규모 강좌를 개설했더니 다음과 같은 긍정적인 효과들이 나타났습니다. 우선 교과 보충에 참가한 학생들에게 물어봤습니다. 응답자 중에 50%의 학생들이 매우 만족한다고 응답했고요. 30%가 만족한다고 응답했습니다. 학생들에게 어떤 점이 좋았는지 물어봤습니다. 소규모 수업이어서 선생님들에게서 개별 지도를 받을 수 있었다는 점, 선생님과 소통이 잘 일어났다는 점 등을 답했고요. 그리고 학생 개개인의 수준에 맞게 배울 수 있어서 좋았다고 답했습니다. 교과 보충에 참여한 학생들과 교사들의 심층 면담 연구에서 우리는 다음과 같은 성과를 확인할 수 있었습니다. 학생들은 교과 보충에 참여하면서 학교에서 정서적으로 편하게 느꼈다고 했고요. 학습 동기와 학습에 대한 자신감이 높아졌고 수업 시간에 상호작용이 더 많아져서 친구들과의 유대감이 강해졌다고 했습니다. 학습 결손 해소를 위한 프로그램이었지만 학생들의 정서 안정과 사회성 회복에 긍정적 영향이 있었던 것으로 보입니다. 또한 예상하지 못했던 성과들도 있었습니다. 정규 교육과정의 틀에서 벗어나서 학생의 희망에 따라서 소수 학생들과 수업하면서 교사들이 다양한 실험적인 수업 방식을 시도하기도 했습니다. 그렇지만 어려움도 있었습니다. 교사들의 업무량과 피로도가 높아졌고요. 한 학급 내에 수준이 낮은 학생들이 한꺼번에 수업을 들어서 더 힘든 수업을 운영하기도 되었습니다. 정말 보충 수업이 필요한 그 수준이 낮은 학생들이 참여할 수 있도록 강제할 수 있는 수단이 없어서 그 학생들이 수업에 참여하도록 할 수 없었던 부분은 아직 한계로 남아있는 부분입니다. 다음으로 심리사회성 프로그램 운영 사례입니다. 이 부분도 역시 학생들의 희망에 따라 운영하는 것을 원칙으로 했습니다. 또래 관계 형성을 위해서 빼놓을 수 없는 것이 신체 활동일 텐데요. 다양한 스포츠 클럽과 소규모 체육대회를 운영했고 학급 단위 레크리에이션 활동이나 교회 체험학습이 운영되었습니다. 예술활동은 주로 연극, 연주회, 영상 제작, 전시회 등 학생들의 다양한 작품 활동이 이루어졌고요. 학교를 넘어서 지역 주민들과 함께 행사를 진행하기도 했습니다. 학교 내 상담 활동으로는 주로 집단 상담이나 드라마 치료 등이 이루어졌고요. 학생들은 이런 활동을 통해서 그간 자신의 내면의 어려움을 친구들과 털어놓기도 하고 친구의 고민을 듣는 시간을 갖기도 했습니다. 이 프로그램에 참가한 학생들은 다음과 같은 성과가 있었다고 말했습니다. 학생 자치회나 동아리를 중심으로 스스로 기획하는 활동들이 많아서 주도성이 높아졌다라는 응답을 했고요. 학교 생활이 더 즐거워졌고 친구와 더 가까워졌다라고도 답했습니다. 집단 상담 등 상담 활동을 하면서 상담실에 가는 것이 더 쉬워졌다고 했고요. 상담교사 입장에서는 심리적인 어려움을 겪는 학생을 조기에 발견해서 전문가에게 연결시켜 줄 수 있어서 학생의 문제가 더 심각해지는 것을 예방할 수 있었다는 답을 하기도 했습니다. 그러나 학교에서 새로운 업무를 누가 할지 갈등이 일어나는 한계 등이 발견됐고요. 교사들의 업무 부담이 증가했습니다. 또한 학교가 자유롭게 필요한 만큼 예산을 신청해서 운영하도록 한 것이 좋았지만 학교나 교사의 역량에 따라서 프로그램 운영의 양이나 질에 차이가 크게 나타나기도 했습니다. 또한 교육회복 종합계획이 전방위적으로 얻은 효과가 이렇게 그 지원이 끝났을 때 어떤 문제가 생기게 될지를 우려하는 목소리들도 있었습니다. 지금까지 경기도교육청에서 학생들의 학습, 심리, 사회성 회복을 위해서 어떤 노력을 했는지 말씀드렸는데요. 저희는 앞으로도 교육회복 종합계획의 성과와 한계를 꾸준히 연구하면서 더 나은 교육을 하도록 노력하도록 하겠습니다. 경청해 주셔서 감사합니다.
뭐라고요? Thank you, Ms. Jae Kim. Without any delay, let me move on to the third speakers. But I think from my chatting box, I see one request. One presenter from from Mr. Aditomo. I hope I pronounced your name properly. But this person is supposed to present in the next session, but he is supposed to take his flight is on board in about 30 minutes, and we are extremely running behind. If Ms. Thapa from Bhutan, if you allow, if you just yield your time or your slot to Mr. Aritomo, that would be great because he needs to take his flight in about like 20 minutes. Would it be okay? Can you wait?
I should be. I also have another task, but that's okay. I'll wait then.
Mr.
So when would my
Aritomo?
time be? When would my time be then?
I think Ms. Thapa kindly agreed or yielded her slides to you. This is kind of urgent case, but if you are ready, you can. I'll give you a chance to present your paper, your presentation first beforehand, before Ms. Thapa. Would it be okay with you?
That would be great. That would be great. I'm very grateful for that, Ms. Thapa. Ms. Kim, thank you so much for the kind accommodation. Allow me to share my screen, everyone. My name is Anindito Aditomo. I'm the head of the National Agency for Education Standards, Curriculum and Assessment at the Ministry of Education in Indonesia. And it's my great pleasure to be able to share with you in this forum our experiences in tackling the learning crisis by which we mean the tragedy of having students at school but learning precious little. You know, this is a crisis signified by the fact that so few students are actually developing foundational competencies which are essential for our collective future. Competencies such as reading literacy and the ability to use math to solve practical problems. So we call our package of policies and programs the Merdeka Belajar movement. Merdeka Belajar means emancipated learning. It is a set of policies and programs that we have carried out for the past 2.5 years approximately to transform our education system. Our main goal is to tackle the acute learning crisis in our system. And because the root cause is systemic, addressing the learning crisis requires fundamental shifts in all key aspects of the system, from infrastructure and technology, financing, leadership to curriculum and assessment and pedagogy. As elsewhere around the world, the pandemic has worsened our learning crisis. We found, for example, that learning progress from grade 1 to grade 2 in terms of literacy and numeracy was significantly reduced compared to before the pandemic. This is a reduction of around 40 to 50% of effectiveness compared to before the pandemic. So what was before a bad situation, it has gotten worse even because of the pandemic. Now, as a main part of our Merdeka Belajar reform, we undertook a revision of our national curriculum framework. So when the pandemic hit, we prioritized one aspect of this curriculum reform, which is a streamlining of the curriculum content. We managed to get rid of 30 to 50% of the content in our national curriculum. I'm sorry. So we managed to reduce the content of our national curriculum by 30 to 50% from each subject matter. And we offered the streamlined version of the curriculum to schools for them to voluntarily adopt. And around 30% of the schools in Indonesia voluntarily adopted the streamlined version of the curriculum. 1 year after the adoption of the streamlined
Mr. Aditomo, we got
Yes.
a request from the participants saying that they want to see your slides, but because of your note, we really cannot see any slides of your presentation. Could you close your
so
note,
sorry.
please? Thank you.
Yeah. So 1 year after the adoption of the streamlined curriculum, we found very significant positive results. So the literacy score and numeracy score for students in schools which adopted the streamlined version of the curriculum are significantly better than compared to students whose schools implemented the full curriculum. And if we translate this gain in terms of learning loss, then we can say that as much as 70 to 86% of the learning loss has been mitigated simply by adopting a streamlined version of the national curriculum. Now we move forward to revamp and revise the national curriculum further. We call the new national curriculum emancipated curriculum. And one of the core principles or one of the core characteristics of the new national curriculum is the streamlined content. So we reduce 30 to 50% of the content compared to the previous curriculum in each subject matter. This is to provide teachers the time and opportunity to be able to actually focus on student learning instead of delivering materials that's mandated from the central government. A second aspect of the national curriculum, of the new curriculum, is that it emancipates teachers and principals to be able to adapt, to customize the national framework into a more suitable curriculum structure for their students and for their schools. So, for example, we no longer mandate yearly learning objectives, but only every 2 years or even every three years. This gives time for schools to go back and forth between within those 2 years to adapt the curriculum to the students' needs. And we really want teachers to be able to implement the principle of teaching at the right level in their day-to-day teaching. A third aspect of the national curriculum is that we mandate 20 to 30% of the curricular time for activities that are practical, collaborative, and oriented to problem solving and project-based learning. In line with the reform in the national curriculum, we also redesign completely how we evaluate schools and the education system in Indonesia. So first, we got rid of a high-stakes external exam that measures student breadth of knowledge, curricular content, and we replaced that with a sample-based national assessment that measures key competencies, so minimum literacy and numeracy, as well as social emotional competencies that we call character in Indonesia. And we also measure the quality of the school as a learning environment. So these are things like the quality of teaching practices that students feel every day, to teachers' reflection and collaboration, to principals' instructional leadership, as well as the school climate, how safe the schools are, and both physically, psychologically, and socially speaking. So we have indicators such as the incidence of bullying at school, for example, the incidence of corporal punishment or physical punishment that students experience in school. And we do this for every school in Indonesia and based on a sample of students within every school. Because we have this national assessment, we can map and monitor the quality of our system nationwide. So we can very precisely pinpoint districts and even schools that are lagging behind in terms of basic competencies such as literacy and numeracy. And because of this, we have been able to target our interventions much more precisely. So, for example, if we have a budget to distribute books and computers to 10,000 schools which most need intervention in terms of reading literacy, we know which 10,000 schools they are across the country, across Indonesia. But more importantly, the results of the national assessment is given back to principals and district officials for them to use to reflect and to plan their budget for next year. So we devised a digital platform called the Rapor Pendidikan, or the Education Scorecard. Each principal in Indonesia can simply log in with their unique account, and then they will get a very rich profile of the state of learning and teaching within their schools. District officials can also do that, and they can monitor the quality of teaching and learning in all schools within their district. And we do this in the context of getting principals and getting district officials to be able to reflect and focus their planning and budget for the most important problem, which is student learning or lack of learning. We launched this Rapor Pendidikan on Education Scorecard platform a few months ago. At the moment, the adoption rate, which is voluntary, we're quite happy with it. So around 146,000 schools, more than 3/4 of the schools in Indonesia have logged in, and 50% have explored the platform. Although we are still having some challenges in terms of the number of schools that actually use the data to revise their budget and planning for next year. We have a national program to help schools to do this in Indonesia. So that's two parts of our Merdeka Belajar reform in Indonesia. Please, if you are interested, just drop me an email, or you can read about our reform in merdekabelajar.kemdikbud.go.id. So thank you so much again for the opportunity to share our efforts to tackle the learning crisis in Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. Aditomo. Please have a safe trip. I hope you met.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tata, as well. Thank you, Ms.
So, Ms. Tapa, are you there? Okay. Thank you for giving your opportunity to Mr. Aditomo. Now, let's hear from Bhutan's case. Thank you. Please begin.
So I'll be talking mostly on the mental health aspect and also the psychosocial support services. So that we actually practiced in Bhutan, and that has taken us all through the pandemic and reached this year, 2022. Can I have the next slide? Okay, so briefly touch on how what were observed and practiced. Like other countries, we also had standard operating procedure for the opening of the schools for the 2022 academic session. And we have staggered school reopening for different levels, different grades of classes. And then in every school, there were rooms kept for provisions to keep or isolate sick students if they at all become sick. And then for the boarding schools, we also have day schools and boarding schools. For the boarding schools, the meal times were staggered for different grade students. And like other countries, we also observed and practiced wearing masks, and then also washing hands and social distancing. And we received a lot of support from parents because they were involved in the school parenting programs. And finally, the mental health and psychosocial aspect part of the schools, students and staff were taken care by the school guidance counselors. Yeah, next slide. Okay, so the first and very important activity that we conducted as soon as the schools reopened after the long close down of schools was the welcome back check-in session, which was supported by UNICEF. And when we actually conducted this program, we also reached out to teachers, not just to students. And as you can see on the table there, we reached out to 3,182 teachers and 54,095 students. And in this activity, we actually mainly focused on how they can build a relationship back again after the long closure of the schools, and also to help them feel cared for, and then also try to create that conducive learning environment in the school so that we can retain the students in the school after the closure. Next slide. Another important activity that we conducted after the reopening of the school is the parenting program. And again, as you can see on the table there, we reached out to 6,000 plus almost 7,000 parents, where we also trained our parents on different skills, parenting skills, and also to help them deal with their children and then the issues. And also a lot of children exhibited behavioral issues such as showing anger tantrums and also some stress, all of these mental health issues. So they were at least trained to identify and create that strong and good relationship with their children, to enable their children to continue their education. Next slide. The other very important activity that we conducted, the program that we conducted, was the peer helpers training. So many schools in our country, almost all secondary schools, have a peer helpers program in place in schools. And this time we specifically focused on I Support My Friends, because the school teachers and the counselors alone were not enough to reach out to individual students. So we trained some of the selected students as peer helpers, and they were trained on this title called I Support My Friend, so that they actually became the bridge between the teacher and the counselor to actually identify their friends who are distressed and having some issues, and make referrals to the counselors and also to the teachers. So we trained around 65 counselors, and these counselors rolled out this program, this training, to the peer helpers. And as you can see on the slide there, we trained 654 girls and 710 boys. And this program was supported by UNICEF. Next slide. Now, during the pandemic, we also had 32 new graduates, counselors who graduated, and we had to recruit them. And then, because the pandemic was a different situation than the other usual years, we had to conduct this entry orientation and planning workshop, where this freshly graduated counselors will go to the field, and when they get into the field, they are ready and equipped with skills and strategies to support students with psychosocial needs, and also to identify and address mental health issues. We trained around 32 new counselors who were equipped to go back to school and support the mental health program of the school. Yeah, next slide. Next slide, yeah. Now I want to say that these are the counselors who are trained and certified, but we also have a lot of schools without counselors. Now, during the pandemic, we could not actually exclude the schools without counselors. We could not deprive the privileges of the students in the schools without the counselors. That's why, to cater the services to all the schools, irrespective of whether they have counselors or not, we trained 562 teachers from the schools where there are no counselors, who were trained as focal teachers to provide psychosocial support services to the students. And these focal teachers actually worked in collaboration with the counselors in the nearby schools or in the district. And then these psychosocial support focal teachers actually helped us in identifying children who are in distress, children who are having issues. And even though they cannot provide professional services, they were at least linking the students who had issues to the service providers like the counselors. Next slide. Right, so this is another very interesting program that we conducted. So this is called Adolescent Enrichment Camp. This was supported by UNESCO, NetCom, Bhutan, and then of course technical expertise from MGIP. And then this camp was conducted for 15 days. And in this camp, we had 61 vulnerable students who were identified by the respective schools, who were vulnerable, who were at risk, and these students were nominated and then gathered in one of the districts of the country, in the southern part of the country, and we conducted this camp for 15 days. And during this training, this camp, we trained our children, 61 children with social and emotional learning skills, how to take care of themselves, self-care, all of this. And this was for 15 days. Next slide. And one of the major activities was to integrate comprehensive sexuality education in the national school curriculum by our education minister. Yeah, next slide. And beginning this year, because during the pandemic, we had a lot of issues that children came seeking counseling. Was one of the issues was bullying. And then this year, as the school reopened, we conducted major anti-bullying awareness programs in the schools in the country. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so briefly talking about how children avail the counseling services. So we had actually initiated an online counseling services where children registered themselves and sought counseling services. And a total of 5,835 students availed the services, counseling services in 2021 alone. Next slide. The age, actually a majority of children in the age range between 13 and 18 years sought the most help, but we also had as young as 6 years and as old as 57 years who sought counseling services. Next. This is the class range. Majority of students from class 7 to 12 sought the most support. Next. I'm rushing because I'm notified of the time. So some of the major issues are discipline and behavioral issues, academic and career, relationship issues, mental health issues, substance use issues. So as you can see in the graph, the figures are written there. So we had this many common issues, but of course there were also other issues, but we had these issues the most. Next. And of the 5,835 students who sought, individuals who sought support, 185 students actually were referred to the specialized service providers like NGOs and hospitals and rehabilitation centers. Yeah, next. And apart from the school counselors, we also have counselors in the head office, and the counselors at the head office provided individual counseling services to 176 individuals, as you can see on the chart. Next. And the final one is the student relocation. During the pandemic, even after the school reopened, there were a lot of students who were in difficult circumstances, who could not continue school if we had not facilitated their relocation. They would have dropped. That's why there were 14 children who were identified as children in difficult circumstances, and they were relocated in a safer school where they had conducive environment, and also in the boarding schools if they had issues at home. So with this, thank you so much. This is the end of my presentation.
Thank you. Let me apologize one more time for not being able to having a Q&A session. Please contact each speakers if you have any question. And with this, let me close the second session. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kim and all the speakers. Now let's move to the last session, session 3, which we will look at the learning recovery approaches and strategies. This session is to be presided over by Ms. Sumaya Magnush, consultant on secondment from OECD UNESCO Bangkok. Ms. Sumaya, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hyewon. Good morning, good afternoon, dear participants, dear speakers and panelists. First of all, I would like to apologize for the delay. We are running behind time, but hopefully you had so far an interesting seminar. It was definitely very rich to listen to the previous sessions. We're reaching the end. So this is the last session that we have. And we will be zooming into the learning and teaching strategies as it relates to learning recovery. So how we can mitigate the learning losses. I will not go into a long presentation, just some housekeeping reminders. First, for our speakers, please keep to the time, to 10 minutes. You will receive a message at the 7-minute mark just to help you wrap up. And then at 10 minutes, you'll receive the second message saying time's up. So just pay attention to those, please. They are to help you keep with the time. And given that we are running out of time, we will not be able to take live questions. But I would still invite participants, if possible, to ask your question in the chat. And maybe our speakers, after the presentation, can answer them by writing in the Q&A tab that you have. Dear speakers, if you have any questions on that, our colleagues here at UNESCO Bangkok can help you, show you how. So without further ado, I give the floor to our colleague, Lee Tu-Huong, who's a program specialist at UNESCO HQ, who will give us an overview of learning recovery strategies in Asia Pacific and around the world. Huong, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sumaya. Probably because I'm conscious that the time, like we will not have enough time, so I will try to probably shorten my presentation in 5 minutes only, and to give time to other speakers. So can you please, just run. Okay, the next slide, please. In preparing my intervention at this seminar, I've did a kind of like a quick review into the strategies that countries have adopted in addressing learning losses or the use to address the recovery phase. And here we use 3 main sources of data. Many of you have been aware that the UNESCO-UNICEF World Bank joint survey on national education responses to COVID-19 school closures. The second source of data that I use is the responses to education disruption survey, or RES. This is a collaboration we have with the IEA, International Association for the Evaluation of Educational Achievements. And the third source of data that I use is a database. Here we at headquarters, we have collected the data from secondary sources on high-stake exams. So really, this is a kind of mapping and tracking of high-stake exam, like how countries have used it in order to not just monitor the learning or student learning, but basically just to observe. Okay, next slide, please. So here, this slide shows a kind of evolvement of country responses to COVID-19. The 4 phases here are relatively not exact for every country, but because we took the data at the global level, so it corresponds to relatively to the 4 phases of the joint UNESCO-UNICEF World Bank survey on national responses to COVID-19. At the broadest level, you can observe here, for example, at, looking at the 3rd column, the policy measure taken by countries, we see a kind of involvement, like the policy measures have shifted from being ad hoc at the very beginning, like at the outbreak of the pandemic in 2020, to something more strategic, more recently. So, for example, this can be the case for most countries. We see in the initial stage, the responses were very ad hoc and address the immediate kind of like effects. And when the vaccination came and schools started to reopen, here the concern is about the scale and the responses. I mean, how to address in with speed and the time. And now, you know, when the situation becomes more stable, then people started thinking of something in a more in a longer term and with the sustainability of these responses. Next slide, please. So we reviewed more in depth the country cases in order to understand better how countries use different strategy for addressing the different issues or concerns. And here in this slide, it shows the different strategies, and we try like to cluster it with the intended effects. So for example, here, the first column, we see that the kind of strategy that countries have used are mainly to address a number of issues or with the expected results or expected effects. For example, like the first one concerns the changes in the student flows, and the strategy used by countries is to just to leave the student, I mean, to repeat the whole academic year. This is a case like for Kenya, or the efforts mean here is to try to re-enroll the dropouts. And the second cluster of effect is to maximize the learning time. Or here the third aspect is about around adapting the curriculum. The fourth cluster is around compensating for the missed or lost learning content. And here throughout, I mean, very important cross-cutting, I mean, all efforts is the efforts to try to understand the learning needs of the students, I mean, through the assessment, I mean, diagnostic or formative assessment or other kind of assessment. And the last category here is about the enabling factors, like the full package for prioritizing training and supporting the teachers, or emphasizing the social emotional learning, either integrated into the curriculum or establishing the measure for support student and teachers at school. Next slide, please. Here, probably I would not go into detail these two slides, but looking at the approaches for recovering lost learning, there are specific programs. For example, like the remedial program, the catch-up programs. These two programs are for students in the mainstream of the formal system. Next slide. And for those students or children who are out of school, there are programs like accelerated education program, accelerated learning program, and the bridging programs. Next slide, please. So a question remains, though, that we wanted to know, like, what is the evidence that can lend empirical support to the adoption of various policy interventions for learning recovery? Because, as you can imagine, I mean, many countries, they use a different strategy or policies, but probably it's just by intuition, or they just take it. But at that time, they didn't have enough time to think through, like, whether or the big questions for us is the extent those strategies that are effective in addressing the different issues or challenges. So we look at the evidence, and here on the learning losses, the very well-known one is the study around the summer learning loss. And there are also some more recent studies conducted at the global level, and we try, like, to understand, I mean, these empirical evidence behind the strategies that that countries have adopted. So before COVID, research on learning loss focuses on summer learning loss, and the most popular approaches for preventing the summer learning loss include extending the school year, providing the intervention programs like the summer school program, or modifying the school calendar. So what we know, what works based on correlation or analysis of outcome data for these strategy and interventions, is that substantial increases in the length of the school year, coupled with corresponding curriculum adjustment, could have a positive impact on student learning. This is confirmed more recently in a study on the impact of the COVID-19 by Michael Kanferberger. And in this study, I mean, she found that the remediation combined with long-term reorientation of curriculum to align with children's learning level will fully mitigate the long-term effects of learning losses. Next slide, please. Here in this slide, we just wanted to highlight some key findings from the RED survey. The data is a lot, and the information can be rich, but I just wanted to draw to your attention some key point or relevant point. And it confirms the importance of student and teachers' well-being. And here, in terms of the group, the most vulnerable groups, it identified three main groups. That means those students who are from the low socioeconomic backgrounds, the students that with special needs, and those students whose first language is not the same as a language of instruction. Also, a very important, maybe quite interesting findings or implication from the REST survey is that we see the role, the multifaceted role of the school. And in many surveys, both at the national, the global level that we've seen, probably people forget, I mean, for some reason, forget about the school the role of the school. So here, it reconfirmed that schools should play that role, and safety, resilience, and inclusivity must be the core goals of all schools moving ahead. Also, another evidence that we want to bring to your attention here is that we all understand that while technology can have lifted the learning conditions and progress, but also importantly, equally important is to ensure that students are provided with adequate resources and a decent physical space to study at home. Next slide, please. Here in this slide, we just wanted to talk a bit about the high-stake exams. So we understand that keeping track of student learning is important, but yet a careful consideration is needed when it comes to high-stake exams, as it has shown here that the maintaining or cancelling exams are likely the two policy options that have the largest scale impact on students from our own analysis. Next slide, please. Yeah, so probably I would skip this slide. This is about the framework, the rapid framework, because many of you are aware or know it already. Next slide, please. And the final notes here that I want to say is that from our kind of quick review, then some messages are consistent, that equity and inclusion should drive all aspects of recovery efforts. And here, talking about effective strategies for learning recovery, it is not about a single strategy, but it is a compact of strategies should be grounded in and aligned with the social, cultural context of learners. And here we also need to pay the attention to the level and locus of the intervention. That means we have to differentiate between the intervention at the classroom level, but also the intervention more at the systemic level. And when people talk about learning losses, then instructional strategies like those used to compensate for student lack of prior learning by attempting to just to fill in the knowledge gap while keeping them in the age-appropriate grade level have proven not to be very effective. But in contrast, strategies that provide targeted and personalized instruction and support, such as the condensed curriculum, micro-teaching, and supplemental or differentiated instruction will work much better. So I stop here. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wong, for this overview of learning recovery strategies and reminding us of the importance of contextualizing depending on also the needs and what are we targeting in terms of concerns and issues. I would like to invite now Gurvin Kaur and Divya Arora from Pratham to present the teaching at the right level strategy and how it is was used in terms of recovery of learning losses, both in India and Nepal. Thank you very much for your patience, and the floor is yours.
Can you confirm if the slides are up?
Yes, they are.
All right, thanks. Good morning, good afternoon, based on where you are. My name is Divya and I'm joined by my colleague Gurveen. We are here to talk about teaching at the right level and share our experiences of its implementation from India and Nepal. So let's get started. What to expect today? We'll first introduce you to Pratham very briefly, then we'll give an overview on teaching at the right level, and finally share experiences of its implementation from the two contexts. So that's a lot to cover, and I might steal a few extra minutes from you, Somaya. Sorry about that. So let's talk about Pratham. Pratham began in the year 1995 in the slums of Mumbai. Ever since, the organization has grown both in scope and size. We work pretty much across the spectrum, right from early years to vocational training in about 20 states in India. Pratham has been known for its innovations around foundational literacy and numeracy through Asar and Tal that have not only been tried in India, but have also been adapted in many global contexts across the world. That's a very brief intro to Pratham, and we'll move on and talk about what is teaching at the right level. So what is teaching at the right level? It is an accelerated learning approach for children in primary grades and above. That groups children by learning levels as opposed to age or grade and helps them catch up on foundational literacy and numeracy skills in a very short span of time. So let's learn, how did the approach really come about being? Now, this data on your screen is from ASER 2018. It tells us about reading levels of children in grades 3 to 5. ASER stands for Annual Status of Education Report, which is an annual citizen-led survey that assesses children's foundational literacy and numeracy skills in every rural district in India since the year 2005. In ASER, children's reading levels are tested using a basic reading tool that is also used in a teaching at the right level intervention. On your screen, you'll see the labels of the different levels that are measured by the reading tool that ASER uses, namely beginner, letter, word, paragraph, and story. Beginner level means that a child cannot even recognize letters. Letter level means that a child can recognize letters but not read words. Word level means that a child can read words but not simple sentences. And a paragraph level means that children can read sentences that are benchmarked at grade level 1. And a story level means that children can read text that is benchmarked at grade level 2 or higher. Now, from the table, you can see that only about 30% children in grades 3 across rural India were at story level in the year 2018 pre-pandemic. One can imagine that the gaps may have only amplified post-pandemic. That is, these children could read grade level text or higher, and rest of the class, which means about 70% of the class, seems to be lagging behind or is in was in the process of acquiring these basic reading skills. One would imagine that these results may improve as children move through grades, but in grade 5 also you can see that 50% of the class was at story level, while the rest of the class seems to be lagging behind. Now, lagging behind is only one part of the problem. More importantly, you will notice from this data that there exists this wide variation across learning levels in a single classroom. And that exactly is the problem that teaching at the right level is trying to address. What should the teacher teach and who should she teach when the expectation is to teach at grade level? So let's see how teaching at the right level really helps solve this problem. So in a typical school scenario, if you look at the table on the left, you will see that children are organized by rows in age-appropriate grades, grades 3, 4, 5. Consider that there are about 3 teachers in a school tackling each of these grades, and roughly there are about 40 children in every grade. Now, the teacher is faced with this wide variation in the classroom, with the children at different learning levels. Now she has that grade level textbook, and the problem is, who should she be teaching? As a result, what ends up happening is that teacher only teaches the top of the class, because I will teach only those who can actually follow the instruction. So the other children continue to lag behind. Now, let's see what is the magic that teaching at the right level does when it enters the classroom. How does it reorganize instruction? So now on your screen, you will see a tile scoop. Children are now organized by columns and not rows anymore. There are still 3 teachers and there are about 3 groups of children, roughly the same size, but the children are more or less at the same levels, and the teacher is equipped with the right activities and materials to teach children based on their learning levels. I hope you will agree that the situation of wide variation in the classroom seems a lot more manageable, and using this information of where the children are, giving them the right activities, the teachers are able to help children catch up on foundational skills in a fairly short span of time. So, and we'll see whether or not this works through the course of the presentation by looking at some impact data. But for now, I'll hand it over to Gurveen to talk a little bit more about teaching at the right level. Gurveen, over to you.
Thank you, Divya. That was quite some speed. I will share my screen. Yeah. Is my screen visible to everyone?
Yes.
Okay, great. So now let's try to understand, how does teaching at the right level work in a classroom? What does a tile classroom exactly look like? So we start with doing a very simple one-on-one assessment, which is an oral assessment done by a teacher or an instructor. And this is generally done in the medium of instruction that the child is in school. After the assessment, the teacher is able to understand that what is the current learning level of the child. And then accordingly, the teacher, as Divya was also saying, the teacher would divide the class into different groups, and these groups will be based on their learning levels. So for example, there'll be a different group for children who are probably advanced level, at para level, at story level, at beginner level. And teachers are allocated to facilitate whole class, group activities, or individual work. So the whole class activity could look like that the teacher starts with narrating a story, or the teacher plays a game with the entire class before starting the class, so that the class as a group starts working together, and then they are divided according to the learning levels, and then after that, for each learning level, for each group, activities are given appropriate to their level. So for example, if there's a word level group, the activities will be such that they progress from word level to para level, or from para level to story level. And during the course of the intervention, we see that the children move from one group to the other. And to formally regroup children, we conduct an assessment again after 15 to 20 days, which is called the midline assessment. And this assessment is done after 15, 20 days, then again, after say 50 to 60 days, to understand what has the progress of the children been during the course of the intervention, and to see where the child is at after the TAL intervention. Now, can TAL be done outside India? Well, the answer is yes. In India, we're working in two different models. We have our own Pratham teams who are working directly with the children. There's a team of 6,000 people who is doing it with the children on the ground. And we're also working in collaboration with the governments. So Pratham, and I will talk about it in the following slides, Pratham works in collaboration with the governments to impart this teaching at the right level approach and actually do it through the government system instead of reinventing the wheel. While it is being done across the country, it is now spread to Africa, Latin America, and also other parts of Asia. Now let's talk about our experience in Karnataka, which is a southern state in India. In 2016, we started with this intervention called Odu Karnataka. Now, Odu Karnataka translates to Read Karnataka in Kannada, which is the local language of this state, Karnataka. The program actually started with the senior government officials of Karnataka reaching out to our senior leadership, stating that there's a problem. Now, our leadership was actually surprised because Karnataka as a state has done some very popular and large-scale experiments to improving the foundational literacy and numeracy skills of children. Whereas the ASER data stated otherwise. The learning levels of children in the state, they were much below the national average. And that's when the government realized that something needed to be done. And they'd seen that TAL is an evidence-based approach. They'd seen rigorous evaluations that the researchers had done on TAL. And that's when they decided to see if this can be delivered to the government. And that's when the program started as a pilot intervention in 2016-17. Now, towards the right of your screen, you will see there are 3 districts marked in deep brown. These are the 3 districts in the southern part of the state of Karnataka, wherein we started the pilot intervention. Now the results of the intervention were amazing, and then they they thought about increasing the scale of the program. And from 2016-17 to actually last year, gradually we've increased the scale of the program. So you can see here on the map that the program was rolled out in stages, and last year in 21-22, the program was rolled out across the state, wherein we reached more than 900,000 children. And okay. Now, if I talk about these 900,000 children who were reached last year, let's see what the data says. This program was done for 60 teaching days with 45 minutes dedicated to math and 45 minutes dedicated to language. So every hour, almost 2 hours were dedicated to this. So the teacher was not allowed to do any other regular curriculum, but do this Odu Karnataka activities. And on your left, you would see the learning levels in language. And in green, you would see that at the baseline, the first bar, at the baseline, only 25% children were able to read story. And this is a very simple grade 2 level story. And only 25% children were able to read a grade 2 level story before at the starting of the intervention. And if I say para or story, it was 47%. Now this 47% actually increased or improved to say 80%. So there was a 31 percentage point improvement in the ability to read a standard 2 level text in a matter of 60 days. And if I talk about operations, this number has increased. The number of children who could do division at the start of the intervention was 32%, and this increased to 68. So there was a significant improvement there also during these 60 days. Now, during the course of the last, say, 5-6 years, there are some key elements that we think are very important to the program. One was that because the idea from the start was that this intervention has to be taken to scale. So the government had appointed like a selected cadre who would lead the program. And these were existing mentors within the existing system who were supposed to visit the schools, work closely with the headmasters, whereas we gave them an additional responsibility to lead this program. And these people were actually called leaders of practice, and they would not just train teachers on TAL approach. Pratham would definitely train them, but they would themselves conduct the TAL class so that they themselves have a hands-on understanding of what the TAL approach entails and what the challenges could be and what the solutions could be for taking it to the schools. Now, I think one of the very, I would say, highlighting factors of the government, especially at that point, was that the material was very low cost. Like a TAL intervention, if we see, it's a very low cost intervention. And I would say the material kit for every school is less than $10. So this was one of the highlighting factors, that this material kit was actually available for all 3 languages that exist in the state and the program ran for. Now, after the teachers are trained, the TAL intervention starts for a period of 60 days. We start with the baseline assessment. Now, you would say, where does the data go for the baseline? So the data is entered by the teacher on the app. There's a Pratham GP app that Pratham has developed in-house, and which the government people, which the teachers or the government cadre, every stage of the government cadre uses, be it people at the state level, district level, block level, which are basically different levels of the government. And they all use this app to see what is the real-time status of the data, be it the monitoring data, be it assessment data. And all these indicators are actually collected and they're available on the app for everyone to make evidence-based decisions. I hope I'm not going too fast, but then let's come to monitoring. During these 60 days, when the teacher is implementing the program, we figured out through our years of experience that it's very, very important that the monitoring cadre is able to mentor the teachers, they're able to monitor the interventions, see that on different levels of indicators, for example, attendance, if the kit is available, if the TAL approach, how it is meant to be, is actually being implemented. And this monitoring, so we collect very simple monitoring indicators, and these indicators are actually put by these leaders of practice on the app. And then regular review meetings are conducted at different levels to actually go through this data. So whatever data we collect is actually used during the intervention to make decisions. Now, if I have to talk about the learnings over the years, I would say that the program is very effective in improving the learning levels of children every year. Every year we did increase the scale or the scope, but every year we saw a similar percentage in improvement. And even last year when we had to do the trainings, some part of the trainings online, it was a hybrid model. And I would say that there's continuous review of assessment data, monitoring data that we collect through review meetings, and which helps in quick action for supporting progress. And because it's lean data collection, we only collect indicators that will be very useful for the intervention, and there's no extra data collection. So, and because everyone is able to view it real time, is that, we're able to use the data well. And then last year, because we had conducted the intervention online, it was important that the teachers receive some support from Pratham or from the government if they need for the activities or be the assessment or be the monitoring. So we actually launched an Urdu Karnataka YouTube channel, which was useful for the teachers to have a continuous support from us. Also, I would like to highlight that Urdu Karnataka has proven to be an effective program over the years.
Sorry, Gurvin, could you start wrapping up? We are at the 15-minute mark. I know you have a lot to cover, so if possible, I'm truly sorry about this.
No, sorry, I'll just last one sentence. This program was actually part of the Harvard case study also last year, wherein they covered different aspects of the program and found it to be a useful program. Over to you, Divya. Sorry.
While I share my screen, I've dropped a link in the chat with resources on teaching at the right level. Please do look at them in case you're more curious and would like to know more. Now, moving on to teaching at the right level in Nepal. So up north, across the border, we are here to share some experiences. I will try to keep it short and not go into the nuts and bolts that have already been covered either through the course of the presentation on the overview or through our work in Karnataka, because the nuts and bolts around measurement, assessments, grouping, monitoring remain the same. They are just contextualized to suit the needs of any new place that we enter into. So for Nepal specifically, it was a recent pilot that was developed. It was led by the World Bank and Street Child of Nepal. For the first time, it was piloted within the public school education system in Nepal. The target grades of 4 and 5, about 2,500 children and 64 public schools across 3 very distinctly differently placed local governments. The pilot ran for a very short period of time, for about 10 weeks, for 2 to 3 hours every day for both reading and math in Nepali between December and March of last year and this year. And there were many different key stakeholders on the project, right from it was endorsed by the Ministry of Education in Nepal. It was owned and implemented in collaboration with the local governments because of the push around decentralization in the country. The implementation was actually led by Street Child of Nepal, and Pratham was brought in to provide technical assistance to the project. Unlike the case of Karnataka, where Pratham directly worked with the government at the state level, here we actually worked with an NGO that in turn worked with the public education system to roll out and implement the pilot. Any teaching at the right level intervention usually has layers of teams. These include the instructors who work with the children. In the case of Nepal, the instructors made up for were the public school teachers as well as paid instructors from the local communities wherever there were resource constraints in the school system. The master trainers were a team of 6 master trainers from Street Child of Nepal that trained these instructors directly. And there was Gurveen has been saying on and on about how mentors are very important, but in the Nepal education system, we don't find this existing layer of supervisors who are able to move around and provide academic support to teachers on an ongoing basis. But this is incredibly important in our experience to have as a layer of a separate team within a TAL structure. So a mentor team was separately created, and it comprised of local NGO staff as well as retired head teachers that were recommended by the local government itself. So did this whole intervention really work? Let's look at some data. I'll only discuss the data on reading. So you see between baseline and end line, the greens and the blues have increased. So more and more children were reading. By the end of the intervention, about 80% children were able to read at least a simple paragraph or grade 1 level text in Nepali as compared to 46% at baseline. Similar gains were also found in mathematics. We often find that the data between language and mathematics is linked, and that's what you can see here as well. So some key takeaways from Nepal that we'd like to share with you is that the project was able to establish a political buy-in very, very early on. The ministry endorsed the project due to existing evidence on the approach, while having local NGOs that had prior working relationships with the local governments enabled us to get the buy-in at the lowest level and move very flexibly and quickly with implementation of the pilot. Having an external mentor cadre being introduced to the public education system also worked very well. During the pilot, the pandemic situation became grave and there were school closures, but having this mentor cadre that was specially created for the structure of implementation was useful, because as soon as the schools reopened, the mentors were able to quickly support the teachers in planning a way forward for their classrooms based on the data collected from midline without any further loss of time. And then finally, building the capacity of the mentors on the use of data in the classroom was incredibly important. Some anecdotal experiences say that because the mentors were strong on the use of data, that they pushed the teachers to use it to inform action in the classroom and teach. And that really led to a very healthy environment of, competition where teachers said, oh, I'm going to be on the top of the leaderboard. All my children from my school are going to be reading. And that was a good thing. The commitment only grew more and more for foundational literacy and numeracy skills. So I'll actually stop there with a one final note to say that quick and large gains can be made in a very, very short span of time. We don't really need 5 years, as my colleague says, we don't need 5 years to make change. And that's what teaching at the right level as a possible solution to learning recovery can do. So I'll stop here. We're happy to take questions in the chat box. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gurvin and Divya, and also for ending on that note that we can act fast and have results fast. Your presentation also answered some of the questions that were already in the chat about how can teachers and schools address classrooms that are quite heterogeneous, and there were mentions of like multi-grade and multi-level classrooms. So teaching at the right level is one example, an effective one for meeting the students where they are rather than teaching for a grade. Without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to our last speaker, Dr. Poomsaran Tongremak, who's the director of the Equitable Education Research Institute at the Equitable Education Fund of Thailand, who will talk to us about a very important point, which is the learning losses in the early years. Dr. Poomsaran, the floor is yours. Thank you, and sorry for the delay.
Hi, hello, hi everyone. So I'm Poomsaran Tongremak from the Equitable Education Fund of Thailand. So today I will discuss mainly about the learning recovery on young children in the case of Thailand. I think from the other presenter for this forum, I think they focus mainly on school-age children or maybe adult students. But in my case, I want to focus mainly on the early years or early childhood students. So during the COVID-19 pandemic in Thailand, I think the children in Thailand have been affected mainly by from the three causes. First is from the learning loss, as we discussed today, that they did not attend the classroom. And the other is on the effect of food or nutrition or the health impact that they do not have enough food or do not have access to nutritious food. And the other impact is on the economic impact because the parents or the household lost income or lost job because of the economic impact from the COVID-19. And I think the economic impact is very important too because it affects how the family spend on their education or spend on their other type of development. So in the past year, in the early years of COVID-19 in Thailand, we try to ask the school principal or school teacher whether we can remedy by helping with the learning loss or something that they need. But interestingly, most of the school principal in Thailand, especially in the rural area, they told us that what they wanted at that time is not about the learning recovery, but what they really need is the food for their children. Because in Thailand, a lot of poor students, they have to rely on the lunch or breakfast from their school because their household or their family cannot provide the healthy food for them. So the COVID-19, it really impacts how the children can have access to the quality food or the quality consumption. So the earliest campaign of the EF is not on the learning loss, but on the food or healthy consumption for the children. So this is very, very interesting. So regarding after the COVID-19 pandemic. So we try to measure the learning loss of the young children or the early grade. So in this case, we work with the University of Thai Chamber of Commerce or UTCC. So we have the program called the School Readiness Program that we measure the cognitive skill, socio-emotional skill, and readiness, school readiness for kindergarten students to prepare them to enter the primary grade. So fortunately, we can record the data before and after COVID for this school readiness program. And we found that for the kindergarten 3 or the year before they will move to the primary school. So the language skill, the mathematics, and the cognitive skill of the children decline around 4 to 5 months in a year. After this, like the first period of COVID-19 and the daycare centers or the kindergarten were closed because of the COVID-19. So we found the evidence of the learning loss among the very young students. And also we found that when we measure the ability of the kids to know the number from 1 to 10, and we also found the evidence of that there are more children who could not count from 1 to 10, and the number has been increasing after the school closure. So in the 3 years from 2020 to 2022, the number of children who cannot count have increased, and so that's the ability of children in terms of cognitive skills. So in the 3 years, the ability of students in terms of cognitive skill have been declined as well in this 3-year period. So we measure almost like every province in Thailand, and we found a very consistent trending of the declining cognitive skill of children. And also, if we measure by the socio-economic status of children from the poor and the not poor or the extremely poor, we found that the more poverty the students' household, the more declining in terms of school readiness they have been. And also the effect of the readiness in numeracy or in language skills also have the impact on the outcome of students when they grow up as well. And we also found that the parental care are really related to learning outcome of young children. So if the parents spend more time reading to their children or spend time like tutoring or nurturing them with their educational support, then the readiness of students in this group will be much better than the household where the parents went out to work or did not have time to spend with the children, or even let the children spend time with their mobile phone or the tablet all day, like without reading to them, something like that. So we found that impact. And one thing that I want to show that is very important work that we just found is that in the program that is called the Teachers and School Quality Program, or TSUP, which we cover around 1,700 schools with 11 education networks. So we have a lot of programmatic to improve the quality of education in this school through various methods. So in one node that we do the research. So this is in the south of Thailand. So in this one node done by the Prince of Songkhla University. So this node of schools consists of 24 schools. And we, as a researcher, we go to check the well-being of young children in these 74 schools in the southern of Thailand. And we found a lot of problem for the second grade student. So the second grade student means that they did not stay in school for 2 years, 2 consecutive years. So it means that they did not spend time in their kindergarten years, or they did not have enough preparation when they were in daycare or kindergarten school. So we found a lot of symptoms of these second grade students, such as the student could not sit straight during the classroom hours, or they are like a fidgety. They often walk out of classroom for toilet, or have no confidence, cannot respond to teacher, cannot communicate in coherent sentences, have difficulty in walking up and down the stairs, and have problem holding hands with holding things with their hands, or showing symptom of weak muscle. And also the academic skill, the proficiency in reading, writing, also impact. They have a lot of school sick leave, and they cannot finish their homework on time, and they feel frustration. They often crying when they come to school, something like that. So this is the symptom that we noticed from the second grade student in the southern of Thailand, in this 74 school. And we also found that the children who miss school for 2 years, they cannot like hold the pencil correctly. So they have very standard way of holding the pencil or writing, and their handwriting is not very good. It's like they did not have a good shape when they try to sit, or try to sit for writing, or sit to listen to the teacher. So they have very strange way of like sitting or writing. So this is the trend that we found at those schools, and we found that a lot of children, of young children who miss kindergarten school in those schools have been impacted. So the researcher, they try to measure the strength of children's muscle by using the equipment to measure the strength. Like we need to do the large muscle, small muscle, and do fine motor skill. So we try to test those physical aspect of the children, and we found that around almost everyone, around 98% of those young children, they have like a weakness in terms of the muscle strength compared to the children of their age before COVID. So it means that for 2 years without the kindergarten education have impact on the strength of the muscle. And also among those schools, so they are like also the poorest school as well. So for those students in those poor schools, they also have a lower level of muscle strength compared to other group of students. So this is the statistic by the province in the southern province. So on average, every province have much lower muscle strength compared to the previous years before the COVID. And okay, I want to show. And the children, they could not write very well, and they also show from this pic, you can see that they also showed incorrect posture, and they often feel exhaustion and have fatigue in the classroom. So the learning recovery that we do, so we focus first on the physical aspect, maybe not on the mental aspect, but I believe that first we have to fix their like a physical ability first. So first we make them to do the rope jumping. So we found that around 56 out of 73 of them could not do it at the first try. So they have to do it repeatedly and do it many times in order to be able to gain their strength back. And we have a lot of practice for the children to recover in terms of the muscle development or joint or bones development, like a short walking practice, jumping with one leg, with two legs, or with different posture, or lying on the back to do the neck or head shoulder development, or a different way of walking to try to improve the bones and the muscle, and do the pulling up for joint development. So this is the video and picture that we go to school to help them with a lot of body or physical practice. So this is like in case of the provinces in the south, and we did this for 2 weeks, and we also go to help them how to correctly hold the pencil, and we also have the pediatrician doctor to help with this, with improving how to hold the pencil, how to write, how to use the muscle. And within 2 weeks, by 2 weeks of training, we found that the muscle development or the strength of their muscle has been improved, even though it's not like to the level of the pre-COVID yet. But on average, when do the pre and post comparison, we found the positive effect that after 2 weeks of training, the student's strength or the muscle or the way of the physical development has been improved quite significantly. So this is just one aspect that I want to show, that in case of the southern of, I believe that it's not only the case of those 70 schools, but it also happened to all the schools, especially for the poor students who missed school for maybe a year or 2 years, especially in the early year. So the physical development must be impacted quite significantly. So I urge that maybe we as an educator or organization that work with children also have to look into this aspect, or try to do the learning recovery through the physical development as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Donglien Mak, and also for reminding us of the importance and of actually focusing on the early years, and also the importance that when we're talking about recovery, we're not just talking about cognitive skills and cognitive learning, we're also talking about like what are like the physical abilities that have been lost, and also social-emotional skills that have not been acquired during the COVID-19. Thank you very much. I would like to thank all the speakers in this third session for their very insightful presentations, and also for their patience as we were running quite late. And without further ado, I would like to hand the floor to our NC. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sumaya, and all the speakers. I am certain that the courses of action taken for the cases presented have great points of reference for us. All the sessions for today are over now. And lastly, please welcome Dr. Eun-young Kim, Director of Office of International Cooperation, KEDI, for the closing remarks.
Thank you. What a seminar. I'd like to repeat what have already said by Hyowon and Sumaya. I would like to thank all the participants for making this seminar where we could share our efforts for the learning recovery. And I appreciate all of you who came and participated in the events today. And I also thank all the colleagues from UNESCO Bangkok and KEDI who supported this seminar. Thank you. Goodbye for next time. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. This is the end of our seminar today. I hope that you had as many takeaways as I had. Last but absolutely not least, I'd like to express my heartfelt thanks to each and every one of you, moderators, speakers, and participants for having been with us. Okay, everyone, have a great morning, a great afternoon, and a great evening. Thank you.
끝인가요?
끝인가요?